All right, I'm sorry everyone for the delay. We are starting now. So we'll just very quickly actually pull the people in. This is a first, everybody stay calm. So first we need to get my virtual camera up here. Then we go into here.
Do like a psychological analysis on the actual game dev to figure out what the hell the puzzle does?
They're doing an actual psychological analysis on the game dev apparently. How are we all?
I am sorry though that you're that the
Hello, Mr. President. How are you?
Down.
I am swell. So I'm actually going to pull you all into the live channel so that we don't have random guests popping in. So just bear with me one sec.
You're all place. Okay,
you're all switching. There we go. Sweet. Hey, stop! Don't leave. Stay in there. Stay in there, all of you. Okay. All right.
All right, I clicked the join because I thought I was in the proper room, and then it shot me back to the other one.
A little weird, yeah.
Oh, it's unfortunate. Okay, here we go.
You can hear me, right?
I can hear you just fine.
Oh, thank God. Okay, good.
Yeah, we're gonna make it, friends. It's okay. Everyone, stay calm.
There's just so many of these fucking things that I use at this point, and every single one of them is different. People are like, do Zoom, do StreamYard, do Discord. I think the only other group that I use Discord with is ICS. So this is like probably the medium I'm least familiar with.
Okay, so Star Panda, you're going no camera, right?
I can do camera.
It's entirely up to you.
You have the cutest VTuber avatar, and I love it.
No,
Thank you.
That's not a real camera. That's cheating. All right. Well, without further ado, because we are already late, thank you everybody for joining me. Especially you in the audience. Technically, you're the people who actually make this financially viable, so you're the only ones who really do matter. Screw these guys. So welcome to the Sunday Symposium, which I just named about 20 minutes ago. A weekly panel show in which I will attempt to facilitate high-quality discussions on topics of cross-aisle political and cultural interest. Today I'm joined by Fairy Queen, Professor Matt McManus, Star Panda, Wick, and Xena and Poppy, who are cheating and having two people on the same screen.
It's true.
So, we are here to discuss the problem of reconciling the value of toleration of religion and of religious diversity with the problematic fact that many religious beliefs directly oppose that value, as well as the existence of other groups, whether these be groups identified by religious, gendered, ideological, or political characteristics. My role today is as a facilitator, which means while I may intervene to ask clarifying questions or to maintain order in the event that it grows too chaotic. Wick, I'm looking at you. I will not be taking sides or taking part as a protagonist in what follows. So how this is going to go down is we're going to go around the group. You're all going to give a roughly 1 or so minutes long introductory statement so we know more or less where you fall. We're then going to have an hour and a half of open discussion, after which we will be taking call-ins. Now, you are obligated to stay for the call-ins, but it'd be great if you were. If you would like to call in, please join the Discord server pinned in the chat and go into the waiting room, and I will pull you in the order in which you arrive, hopefully. So with that out of the way, let's start from the top. We'll go around clockwise. Fairy Queen, would you like to begin?
Thank you. I would. Our topic tonight is, can we reconcile tolerance of religion and anti-progressive religious beliefs? And I will come to all of you in humility in that I don't know, but I am prepared to listen to what our conversation will reveal. I am leaning towards the answer that no, I am not sure, and that it probably depends in some circumstances. Before we begin our conversation, I have a few pitfalls I'd like to ask that we try to avoid. Number one, arguing about what the doctrine of a faith actually teaches. First reason is that even if the doctrine of the faith doesn't actually translate to an intolerant belief, that does not necessarily mean that people do not sincerely hold those beliefs. So an example would be the classic Leviticus translation of the verse, "Thou shalt not lie with a man as you shall with a woman," right? But if you actually go into the actual word that is used to translate man, and we can go more into depth of this as the debate carries on, it is actually proven, it's not proven, but there are many scholars who believe that the verse actually is supposed to condemn adultery in that context. It is not a condemnation of homosexuality. It's supposed to be a condemnation of adultery, and in some instances, it's also interpreted to be a condemnation of rape, male on male rape. So But nevertheless, even though that can be an interpretation, it doesn't mean that there aren't people who don't sincerely hold the belief that homosexuality is immoral due to their religion, which means that arguing about whether or not the faith actually is homophobic or is not homophobic is besides the point, right? Secondly, I would like to avoid any literary interpretations, right? So there's a quote from C.S. Lewis: any theory which bases itself on a supposed historical Jesus to be dug out of the Gospels and then set up in opposition to Christian teaching is suspect. There have been far too many historical Jesuses, a liberal Jesus, a pneumatic Jesus, a Barthian Jesus, a Marxist Jesus. They are a cheap crop of each publisher's list. I believe I'm running out of time.
Thank you very much for the 1 minute long opening, Fairy Queen. It's much appreciated. No, it's totally fine.
I'm sorry.
You'll have lots of time. You'll have lots of time to flesh out. Do you want to just wrap up really quick?
Yes. So here are the two things I'd like to ask my fellow panelists, and I can go through the pitfalls later as well. I'd like to know, one, what does it substantively mean to reconcile tolerance? Does it mean that we decry Salman Rushdie when he's stabbed after 33 years after a fundamentalist answered the cry of that 10,000 protesters outside of Islamabad? Or does it mean that we slam Rushdie's work for its insensitivity towards Muslim populations in Europe? Does it mean that we think that the law should not intervene on behalf of a child, of a Jehovah's Witness, allowing her to die on the operating table if parents do not consent to their daughter receiving a blood transfusion? So number one, what does it mean to reconcile tolerance? Number two, I want to inquire on what makes a belief anti-progressive. I know there's a normative understanding.
Matt McManus, I'm terribly sorry, Fairy Queen, but I said 1 minute and I gave you an extra one. Matt, you have 2 minutes if you so choose. No, don't sweat it. It's all good. Continue, please.
No worries. Well, first off, thanks a lot for inviting me. It's great to be back.
Thank you for being here.
And it's great to have our new panelists and to get to meet everyone. Very briefly, I'm in a kind of a weird situation whenever it comes to this, because as a liberal Christian socialist, I have my own inclinations about this, but also as somebody who ends up writing a lot about Marx, Nietzsche, and secularism, I'm also attentive to the problems that are associated with the dynamic secularization and some of the emancipatory dimensions of that as well. So my approach to religion is inherently dialectical. I think that there are elements of every religious tradition that we can look at that have emancipatory and progressive qualities. And certainly I'm not alone there. I also think that there are many elements of every religious tradition, certainly that I'm familiar with, that have regressive qualities, that support various forms of hierarchical organization, that entail the subordination of vast numbers of people. And those are the kind of things that I don't necessarily want to get behind. So in terms of, do I think that we can reconcile progressive social policies with religion? I think the answer is yes, but with a very long but and about 1 million qualifications after that we'll probably get into over the course of this discussion.
Thank you very much. Star Panda. You are inaudible, just so you know.
Yep.
There you go.
I fixed it. So I wasn't sure about the question. I didn't necessarily like that it seemed to presuppose that religion is inherently anti-progressive, but maybe I'm wrong on that. But essentially, it feels like this is an issue of a culture of anti-progress and anti-intellectualism, where I guess people don't really want to think critically, like in the general populace. People want necessarily an easy answer and often don't want to take nuance into consideration. And ultimately, this isn't really a religion problem to me. It's more like anyone seems to be able to be anti-progressive, and it seems clear to me that even atheists can lead the charge in that respect. So that's my position.
Thank you very much. Wick, take it away.
Yeah, so it comes down to, do we tolerate the beliefs of others, whether religious or otherwise, who seem to be antithetical towards progressive values or antithetical to our own values? And I think that we can do naught else to do, like often is brought up, and I'm sure it might come up today, is the paradox of tolerance, Popper's paradox of tolerance. I reject the framing that if we do not stop the intolerant, and by we I mean the state or other institutions, that people will simply fall into intolerance from those preaching it. I have faith that people can be and should be and will be better. That if we allow people to make their own decisions and you give them options between tolerance and intolerance, yes, sometimes they may choose the intolerance. But if we take away their choice and simply exile or censor anyone or anything that espouses any intolerant views, we've taken away their choice, and I think that's fundamentally anti-progressive. We'll get into it in the open. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. Xena and Poppy, so there's two of you on the one screen. I've just received confirmation that Eudaimonia will not be making it today. He has some personal obligations that have popped up or something along those lines. If you would both like to take a minute, be my guest, because we are one man short. So yeah.
I can start us off, and then you want to go?
No, we'll mostly kind of figured out our opening statement together. So.
Yeah, so...
yeah, go ahead.
So, I guess I find myself in a place of sort of, again, it comes down to looking at things in a practical sense. Is there a way to reconcile this? And to me, I don't have a problem with someone necessarily having an intolerant belief until that belief becomes political action. So for me, the issue is that you can have an intolerant belief, but when you try to exercise that belief in a way that then does harm, for example, preventing a child from transitioning, from allowing a person to explore themselves or to do whatever is necessary for their own personal growth, benefit, medical well-being, etc., that's when you've stepped in it. And to me, the issue here is that, at least from our perspective, the way we've talked about it, is that I think it comes down to a fundamental philosophical discussion about what beliefs should be tolerated in a just society. I think we have to come down to actual individual beliefs. And again, I agree with the notion that we shouldn't get hung up on this notion of what, the doctrine actually says. I don't give a fuck what the doctrine says. What I give a fuck about is the people and the way in which they enact their beliefs. So if someone thinks that me and mine are going to go to hell, that is unacceptable. I don't care what their magic sky daddy tells them. At the end of the day, that should not be allowed within a just society, because that belief, fundamentally, if it starts being used as political action, will lead to some form of social violence, one way or the other. Go ahead, Zizi.
Yeah, no, I 1000% agree.
Yeah.
A lot of the issue comes down to, okay, on a personal level, like things that just exist within me, totally cool. As soon as those beliefs start fueling actions and affecting how we treat others, then we have a problem that we actually need to start looking at, okay, how are we treating others? Are we doing that with kindness, or are we harassing people?
Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you very much.
And in fact,
I'm sorry, you're still going. My apologies.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
No, it's okay. You paused. I thought you were finished. Continue.
Especially on, the left and in progressive spaces, there does actually tend to be a wide variety of religious beliefs among everyone. I've been finding that a lot of people tend to just keep those close to the chest. So I would rather find a space that can be open and accepting to various beliefs.
Mm-hmm. All right.
And solidarity to everybody this Labor Day. Feel very important to get that out there.
Thank you very much.
Beautiful. I want to, if I may, is this open now?
It is. I was about to say it's now open, so be my guest.
Okay. Sorry, I sometimes forget.
We're going to go for an hour and a half. It's all good. It's because you're in the center of the screen. I understand why that would give you an ego.
I want to talk to Xena and Poppy.
Sure.
Xena is the one on the right or the left?
Xena, Poppy.
Okay, I'll try to remember that. Forgive me if I don't. Poppy, you mentioned that you wanted to. We can't tolerate certain beliefs. Like if someone believes that you and yours are going to go to hell, right?
Sure.
If someone really believes that what you and yours is doing is sinful, wrong, and immoral, that we can't accept that. How would we? What mechanism would society use to stop that? Is my question.
I mean, my joke answer would be putting them in the stocks, but the actual answer would be something more akin to, I think, genuine just social pressure. I don't like the idea of using the state because the state tends to overextend its use of violence. To me, it would be more a question of, by reformatting culture to allow for religious beliefs to exist, but also be willing to temper those beliefs against what are essentially I would consider forms of spiritual violence. Like to say that somebody is going to hell for being trans or for being gay is a kind of in my mind, spiritual violence. You're making a claim. One of the reasons why I settled spiritually on Buddhism, I'm an ordained Zen priest in the Hollow Bones, or at least I was until I stepped away, is that Zen made no such claims. There are orders that do, but those are individual. I went with that because it seemed the best at the time, and it's also didn't make any kind of prescriptive statements about how I should be other than awake. And so to me, I come from that school of thought, which is that I think it's fine to police our own behavior. I think it's okay to have principles that you hold to because of religious values. But when you start to bring those onto other people, no, I think there should be social pressure to go away from that line of thinking, because almost always these types of things start to bleed into other aspects of reality.
Okay. I was raised, full disclosure, I was raised Mormon. So while I am now, I'm still technically Mormon, I'm now like doubting Thomas type of deal, right? One of the things that I struggled with growing up was how in the doctrine it would preach we need to be accepting of others. And for example, Jesus, when he was alive, if you believe in Jesus, if you follow the scriptures at all, in the Bible, it says that he befriended the sinners. He befriended the tax collectors, the adulterers, the whores, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I would see the juxtaposition of that versus how I was told, oh, don't have non-Mormon friends. Don't date non-Mormons. Don't associate with non-Mormons because they will corrupt you and they will take away like your ability. So when we say things, right, like we cannot tolerate, we need to socially pressure these groups out because they're not like us, they're different than us. I hear echoes of that, and I understand what you're saying, that you don't like the spiritual violence term is interesting. I want to investigate it a little later. But
Sure.
this idea, right, that we cannot tolerate those that have beliefs that contradict and are at odds with us. I don't know if I believe that. I think that like social pressure, I don't want to social pressure them out of their beliefs by exile. I want to social pressure them out of their beliefs by just example, by providing a better way, by showing the benefits of tolerance. But yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
Could I interrupt on something there? Because I think there's a miscommunication we're having, and that is that. So when I say social pressure, I'm not necessarily saying punishment. When I say social pressure, what I'm referring to is any kind of social pressure. So I could even change out the word and use incentive. To me, whether it's a positive or negative incentive, my goal would be to incentivize them away from those types of beliefs, because to me, those types of beliefs inevitably lead to certain types of, well, there's two parts. One would be they first lead to an issue where inevitably, due to those judgments, people will then start trying to enact those things on the ground in reality, right? This is why somebody who can be very, very sort of religious and aggressively so will start, engaging in things like transphobia or hate speech, things like that. But the other part of it is that at least at some level, those beliefs actually stand in opposition to the values we hold as a society. If we believe in if we believe in liberty. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry,
Sure.
I don't mean to monopolize things.
Oh, you're good.
So that's the crux of it, right? I think that like even if there's groups in society that want to change society, and they don't have to be religious, right? That want to make society less tolerant, and this is where kind of the crux of the issue is that if we are to make our society less tolerant for those groups, then I mean we've done their work for them in a way. I think mechanisms and procedure are very important. And what is decried as a hateful religion or an intolerant religion one day can be expanded by bad actors, either on the legislative level or on the cultural level. And by feeding into that, we have to stop the bad guys by pressuring them out, is going to lead to bad actions. And that's my only worry and concern. And I've seen it play out, and I think we have to, and as unsatisfying as that may be, is we have to accept We have to turn the other cheek. We have to accept the spiritual violence, as you will, because to fight against it just makes us worse as a society. But anyway, that's me.
Thank you very much. Does anybody else want to jump into this?
I had a question for both groups, if that's possible. Wick and Xena and Poppy. That cool?
Yeah.
Sure. I know Xena had something too, so book Xena and go after that. But go ahead.
Okay, cool. So this is just whoever wants to answer the question. So just a little bit of background, right? I grew up in a actually a very conservative town. The leader of the Conservative Party of Canada is now in my riding. I grew up Roman Catholic. I tended to believe that homosexuality was wrong, abortion was wrong, and it was a real transition, and a difficult transition, I should say, for me to give up those beliefs. But I'm very happy that they are gone. And one of the things that really inspired me to transition away from these kind of belief systems when I was like a teenager or something was the fact that I had queer friends and queer cousins and a trans cousin, all of whom said, this isn't right. You should change your attitude about these things. And gradually over time I did, because I realized that I was being an asshole about these things and that I didn't want to be that kind of person anymore. And I'm very grateful for that. But I think it was a tough thing for me reflecting on this, because on the one hand, there is no doubt that having positive queer role models in my life was essential for me to give up some of my more reactionary views. On the other hand, it makes me really uncomfortable when I hear people say, like, well, this is what the thing, they should model this kind of good behavior for you or other people like you in that similar situation, and that will lead to the kind of transitions that we think are important, because it kind of lays the onus on the victims of prejudice to actually model the kind of correct behavior to enable people to move away from prejudice. I don't really have a good answer for this, and I'm just wondering if you guys kind of know what you think the right formula would be.
You want to go first, and I'll go after?
Sure. I mean, I know ZZ and I've talked about this on our channel before, but like the big thing for us is always like, again, it's exposure therapy, right? I'm a therapist by trade, and so like for me, this comes down to exposure therapy. Like representation is huge, so making sure that people have good examples of queer, like we'll use queer people because that seems to be coming up. Like queer people is a good example. Like again, like a little girl, like a 4 or 5 year old little girl sees, even if she's in a conservative family, watches Shira, parents are off doing whatever they're doing, and she sees, Catra kiss Adora, and even though the social systems around her prescribe this as being wrong, if she's a little gay girl, like, that seed is now planted. Like, wait, girls are an option? So to me, representation is huge, giving people the opportunity. I am a big fan. It's interesting because, like, even though Wick and us seem to come down on a different perspective, we're also a big fan of choice. And so to me, part of the way you create this is by giving people as many options as possible without, obviously creating, like, the paradox of choice. My issue, and I think ZZ's as well, is just giving people as much examples as possible. The more there are trans people in existence, the more people get used to our existence, and it becomes less and less of an issue.
I think this is actually a really good place for me to hop in.
Go ahead.
Because part of the thing with choice is that you actually need to have the knowledge to make choices, right? If the only thing you've grown up with is this thing is the bad, then that's all you've got, and that thing is bad. And so I slightly disagree with Poppy from earlier. I do think that there are a few ways that our legal system can still help with this issue. I'm a big fan of enumerations on non-discrimination policies. That has been shown to do a lot of good as far as bullying and harassment. And so this is helpful in schools, in the workplace, and a lot of other places to make it clear to people, like, no, these groups are protected. We're not going to go harass and harm them, okay? And I think that the more education we can do, particularly like in schools, okay, or even on like just a local level, just hosting events, can be really, really helpful to be a social pressure to move people away from these things. Because suddenly there is now more options for them to learn and see other examples. And usually when you're doing events, it is a bit easier to solve like the role model issue of, okay, not everyone has to be a role model, but now you have people identified in your communities that are. And like, I grew up in a town that is very, very Christian, has all kinds of mega churches, and actually it does have some of the fire and brimstone churches, and like put in the paper that certain people were going to burn in hell, all right, for supporting gay rights. Like, that was a thing that happened. So, I think we do need to find demonstrable ways to actually like address this stuff. even if we want to let them have, the choices, what they're doing is essentially harassment.
Is that harassment though? But I want to answer Matt. Is that your name? I'm sorry, Matt's question first.
Yep.
But then I want to talk about that. So to your question, like, about putting the onus on the victims of oppression to be the examples, and it feels icky, but I think it's the only way forward. It's not fair, it's not just, but it works. Contact theory works. And while in an ideal world they wouldn't have to, I don't know if we live in an ideal world. In fact, I think we don't. And I think that we need to just go with what works. And while people who aren't members of those oppressed groups can be allies, it's not the same, and it doesn't have the same effect that it does when members of those groups do it. I think that, again, being an example is just powerful. It has a lot of influence, and yeah, like it's maybe not a satisfying answer. I just, again, over and over I've seen where you have to give, even if it hurts, in order for people to tolerate you, and it's not fair, but it is. So.
All right. Would anybody else like to jump in?
That's a really weird one. It almost, because the effect of that, right? If you're like constantly having to be in the state of a role model, you're basically like, okay, eyes are always on me. I have to constantly act like people are watching me. And then it also separates you out of now, like, wait, do I actually get to be a person? Like, I have my flaws. Okay, there are things that make me cranky, and that's gonna happen. I'm gonna get into fights with people occasionally. Sure. Like, but to say like, oh no, you always need to be a role model. Like, no, that doesn't, like, groups aren't a monolith. That gives like a really strange impression anyway.
We saw how well that worked with Keffels.
Yeah. Pretty much.
I'm not getting into the Keffels thing, but I will say, yeah, it sucks. I mean, there's no two ways about it. It's not fair, but how else are we to do this? Like, if I could wave a magic wand and make people more tolerant, I would, but I can't. And I don't have the same effect that you do, for example. I can't talk about things with the same air of authority that you can, for example. And again, yes, that's one of the problems here. But the thing is, that's just true of any group and organization. If I remember being a missionary for my church. We were told over and over and over again, even if people hit you, beat you, attacked you, you were to not fight back because you represented the church. And that you were part of this, and while it sucked and it wasn't fair, you needed to be a better person. I don't think it's wrong, and I think it's a good thing to be tolerant of others who do bad things to you, to an extent. There's lines, obviously. I think that makes us better people. And
if I may interject with a clarifying question, I can see a potential problem in your analogy, Wick, in that the person who is going out to proselytize on behalf of some persecuted religious minority, say, is doing so willingly as an incursion into the comfort and territory of other groups in society. One of the ways in which this is disanalogous, even leaving aside whether or not this is a practically efficacious way to proceed, is that, for example, for a trans person who is mistreated in this way, they aren't mistreated in this way in the course, necessarily, of going out and proselytizing in a school or in a neighborhood or at someone's house or wherever. They're persecuted for existing, for being visible in the media, for walking through the store, for going into a washroom. In fact, increasingly, we've seen even cis women are being targeted in this way. So intense is the paranoia at this juncture. So how do we reconcile this? Because it seems like what is being asked of persecuted minorities who are just living their lives is to take on the responsibilities of a proselytizer, when it seems to me that that's a statement that stands in need of some justification.
I guess my
I just wanted to interject and say I think Fairy Queen wanted to say something a couple times.
Oh, Fairy Queen, please jump in and assert yourself if you'd like to speak. It's just it's the way.
If I may just address this real quick, then Fairy Queen can go and I'll shut up for a while. Okay. So if you don't I'm only speaking to the people who want to make change, an effective change. If you just want to exist and you don't care about society or things, and that's a kind of a weird way to say it, but it's there's no judgment there. Why should you, right? You should live your life. You should be happy. You should be fine. Then ignore what I'm saying because I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to the people who want to advocate for effective societal and cultural change. And if you are a proselytizer, you are an advocate. That's what it is. It's synonymous. And so that's what I would say to that. So if you want to be an effective agent of change, then this is how you should behave. If you just want to live your life and you don't care, then yes, absolutely, do what you got to do.
All right, Fairy Queen.
On the one hand, I deeply sympathize with what Poppy, Xena, and with what Wick are saying on the idea that we do need representation. Yes, that having contact, in the example being given, like with more queer people, probably will make you, in the long run, less homophobic. I do agree. I do think that that is true. But part of the issue that I have, the question that we have today is, can we reconcile tolerance of religion and anti-progressive religious beliefs? In my mind, the people who are most at risk are minorities who exist within religious minority communities. So an example of this would be the FLDS community. How many of you saw the documentary series, Keep Sweet, Pray and Obey? That's, if you haven't seen it, it's not a wonderful series, it's very horrific, but it's about the systematic abuse of teenage girls who were married in these polygamous marriages. Some of them were pregnant at 16. The young boys, the teenage boys, they were run off. They were thrown into the middle of the street to fend for themselves. These people cannot be helped with more representation in media. And I don't know that they can be helped even with representation in schools because of the fact that these communities are isolated in nature, right? And I also was raised Roman Catholic, and I also went to youth group clubs. One thing that I remember that was consistently said within those religious settings was, we are not of the world, we are in the world. This is something that is repeatedly said when you go and you attend certain religious communities. It's that you might live in society, but you're not supposed to be of it, right? You're supposed to belong to the church, the bubble, right? And it's a sort of an us versus a them dichotomy, right? Another series that talks about this is the Duggar series that recently came out, right? How is more representation in media going to help, one of the Duggar children when every single one of the books that even has a mention of homosexuality, even a whiff of it, is ripped out of the curriculum and thrown to the wind?
Well, that's why we can't tolerate those actions. That's why it comes back to what I said earlier, is that I think that the social pressure, and again, like Zena said, even possible legal pressure needs to be dealt with. I mean, the problem is that you can't use representation to fight someone like DeSantis, right? Like, you can't fight a cult like the Duggars or like the people you're talking about in the same way. Like, that's what these groups are. I mean, to me, they're extremists. And at least to some degree, if people have isolated themselves to such a degree that, like you said, they're in the world, but they're not of the world. They're they've made themselves a separate organization where they are so deeply disconnected. To me, that starts getting into a question of, should we allow those groups to exist?
Well, and the stuff that you're mentioning especially is starting to bridge on abuse, just straight out abuse. And
I mean, look at the Duggars.
Yeah. So I think those almost fall into another legal category of, okay, now how do we actually structure laws to protect from abuses happening in those situations? And that's a little bit,
Yeah, we don't allow human sacrifice.
Very quickly, Star Panda, I see your mouth moving. I don't know how much you can actually gesticulate with your VTuber. Did you want to weigh in on this?
I did. Probably not what was said just now specifically, but there was something from Wick that rubbed me a little bit the wrong way. So when you were talking about, what was it, the good role models for certain minority communities, it rubs me the wrong way because even if you do have those good role models, if you're going to, let's say, a very conservative place, they're going to be deep in that sauce, and they may see that one person as like one of the good ones. So it doesn't really help that much in that way, where like it happens with like black communities too. They'll see a person as one of the good ones rather than seeing it as the whole community being like people, right? So like you need diverse kind of perspectives, I guess.
So if I can
to be able to,
if I could just very quickly, just for the sake of clarity. So what you're pointing out is that in the event that you even have maybe like a high concentration of people who are deliberately attempting to model good behaviors on behalf of the group so it looks decent and acceptable to groups on the outside, nonetheless, there might be a perverse effect that takes place where the people who sign on to the bad view of that group in the other groups that are judging it, they may be taken as the good examples of that group, and the rest of them are essentially canceled out. Is that more or less reflective of what you're saying there?
Essentially, yeah.
Okay,
basically, like, you can't really control how other people see you, and it becomes frustrating, even if you're an advocate, when you're trying to like put out this good image, I guess, and they just see the good image coming from you, but then like extrapolate other things from the other parts of the community.
Okay, if I could just add to that.
Matt, and then Wick, and then whoever else wants to jump in next, put your hand up, okay? Continue, please.
Thank you. My comment is extremely brief. I think that's a very good point by Star Panda. I spent a lot of time writing about the right, sometimes to excess. But one of the most consistent features you can see of right-wing talking points is their ability to rhetorically deflect any association with hate while still advancing what are ultimately bigoted policies. You can see this in multiple levels, right? I am not a racist, but I don't want these people living near me, and also I want my community to look the same as it did before. Really common one we can hear about from Tucker Carlson. I just reviewed Matt Walsh's extraordinarily transphobic book, What is a Woman, for Jackman Magazine. And he consistently says, I don't hate trans people. There are even trans people that I like. He doesn't use that term, right? But, love the sin or hate the sin, right? And to my mind, that is about as fig leaf as you can possibly get for advancing what is an extraordinarily hateful, very transphobic rhetoric that is abetting any number of extraordinarily cruel policies in red states right now. So I think that we need to be very skeptical of instances where we see that kind of rhetoric deployed for exactly the reasons that Star Panda mentioned.
Thank you very much. Wick, please.
There's a lot to. I'll be as brief as possible, but I want to tackle what Fairy Queen said, and I also want to address Star Panda's criticism. So I guess it comes down to whether or not you believe contact theory works, and I do. I think it's a sound theory. I think I've seen the effects of it, and I think we've all seen the effects of it as a society. Like, I'm a little older. I'm 40 years old, right? I have seen society shift because of these good examples, and that's the thing. It doesn't happen in a month, a day, a week, even a year. This is a generational shift that goes on. It's incremental and it's frustrating. I understand. I get it. But the arc of justice is long, or the arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. I'm fucking up that quote, but you know what I mean. And it's very true. We see through the sacrifice that individuals and groups have made, we have come a long way, and we have a long way to go, but we are much more tolerant today than we were 50 years ago. On almost every metric, life is better today for minority groups in America than it was 50 years ago. So while, yes, it can be frustrating in the now because we don't see any shifts, we don't see any changes, and we see some backlash coming out. And we can't ignore the backlash, like the Matt Walshes, the Tucker Carlsons, the DeSantises of the world. There are problems, and what we need to do is take away their base of power, right? The reason that they have influence and power is because they have an audience that wants that kind of thing, that are looking for justifications towards their prejudice and things like that, and their fears.
If I can,
please go for it. And then Xena and Poppy, you were waiting. Fairy Queen, and then Xena.
Yeah, I did want to get to Fairy Queen's point,
Okay, but you responded to one, so I'm going to do is I'm going to let Fairy Queen respond, I'm going to let Xena respond, I'm going to let you come back to it, and then we're going to switch gears a little bit. Fairy Queen, please.
Wick. So I don't disagree. I believe, obviously, that over the course of history, that obviously we are in a much better position than we would have been 50 or 100 years ago. I also think that point is besides the point. Because even in the golden hill that we are all striving towards, you are still going to have some people that are within, if you promote religious tolerance, who are going to have extremist views on the fringe, who are going to want to self-isolate, who are going to probably discriminate against minorities who are within the minority community, right? So even if it's true, and I don't disagree, and I certainly hope that it's true, and to be very clear, I'm not disagreeing that representation doesn't matter or that it doesn't work. What I'm saying is it is not going to be effective in all cases. And when we're talking about discrimination within these communities, we are talking about communities that are often on the fringe. We're not talking about your average churchgoer. We're not talking about your average person. We're talking about people who have deliberately extremist views. And I do want to respond to something that Poppy and that Xena said. And listen, I sympathize with that, and I agree that, especially with the FLDS and with the Duggar family, clear instances of abuse. But you're going to come into a problem, and this is why I really wanted to interrogate what that meaning of the word an anti-progressive belief really is. This is the reason why I brought up Salman Rushdie and the Satanic Verses, right? That's a very clear example where different people on the sides of that argument had very different ideas on what it meant to be, what a progressive value was, right? So what if, for instance, you go into a community, it's a closed Muslim community, and you have a man, for instance, who has 4 wives? Is that something that we should socially pressure men to not be able to do within our society? Because you can provide that. But if you do, you're probably going to get some pushback that your pressure is Islamophobic and that it's intolerant and that it's a colonial Western attitude that is being imposed upon these communities, right? You're going to find that that's true for many religious communities, which is a concern and something worth thinking about.
That's a very interesting point you've actually brought up, Fairy Queen. You know what you should actually look into, though, is not necessarily the treatment of Muslims. You should look in the treatment of Indians in Britain and Canada, in particular, in the last century. It gets really interesting that way. That was used for a lot of...
I was going to say, Canada has exactly that problem with when we introduced religious courts for family law. In the early 2000s in the province of Ontario. So it's not even a hypothetical, right? It's a very real problem. Very real difficulty to sort through.
I'm so sorry for derailing. Xena and Poppy, you were just directly addressed. If you want to respond.
So as a woman who is 42 years old and has been around since the beginning of the Reagan administration, I guess I kind of disagree. Like, yeah, progress has gotten better, more representation has gotten better, but I've also seen the backlash against trans people become, instead of a silent killer that slowly murders my community over the course of time, a very real day-to-day life threat. Like, I can go online to any place, and basically my bottom surgery that just happened on the 10th, I can get told by any number of conservatives that that's a rot pocket. Like, there's a very real way in which, yes, things have gotten better, but just barely. If you look, like, you can go on LGBTQ Nation and look at the list of horrors that the Trump administration did against queer people, and everything Biden fixed day one. Like, one vote, one presidential election changed whether I had certain rights. So to say that, like, it's getting better, no, this is a constant tension and fight. And also, it's not just a peaceful fight through representation, it's also throwing bricks. Like, so part of this comes down to, like, first off, that question is that I reject the notion that it is a simple essentialist. We're always moving more towards progress. No, this is much more complicated than that, because I live it. I literally was in Target last night, and a teenager walked by me and called me Mr., then Miss, then they, them, because he knew it would get a rise, get an interesting reaction out of the 2 girls he was with. Did it affect me too much? Not really. But it still fucking happened. Now, to respond to the notion about how you deal with that, I guess my problem is that, yeah, I guess I just reject the notion that shutting down intolerant, horrible groups is somehow Islamophobic or, somehow anti-Christian or whatnot. To some degree, we have to kind of take those on the chin in some cases, because at least from my perspective, you're still describing groups that fundamentally are engaging in behaviors and beliefs that to me are directly in opposition to what we as a society at least ostensibly claim. Like, again, from my perspective, the Republican Party is in direct opposition, but I'll let ZZ go.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
One of the big things that I want to bring up that I think he's getting confused in here is we have a whole series on our channel called Harm versus Offense.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so we talk about what actions are harmful versus what is people being offended. And not that the offense is invalid, that's not the point here. Like, no, sometimes you got to deal with, interpersonal stuff, okay? And so the point is kind of teasing out what's a individual harm or offense versus what is a large systemic harm versus offense. And I think those values absolutely need to be used here. Because in the example with like the multiple wives, okay, is this a situation where people are being hurt? Are they being harmed? Are they being coerced? Is that what, or is this a situation where they're all consenting adults, they all feel fine in their situation, right? They feel safe, they feel like they have, the independence that they need. And so I want to use those are the values that I would use when I'm picking out, okay, well, what situations are the ones we need to call out and which ones aren't?
Thank you. And Wick, I'm going to let you respond.
Sure. I think that there's almost two separate categories that we need to deal with here. There are where we talk about abuse. I would say abuse rather than harm, because I think some levels of harm are just going to be with us.
We're generally talking about systemic harm.
Sure.
In this case, that's what that
but
means.
I'm trying to address Fairy Queen's point about abuse in the FLDS movement, things like that, where people are literally kept prisoner, right? And married off at 14, 12, 16, right? Really, really young. We can recognize that there are certain things that are beyond the pale. It's not about belief in that case. It's about abuse that we have decided, right? That we are just going to not tolerate. And I think that's a separate thing than a belief. So my separation is I would allow someone to advocate for that thing. To say, hey, I think we should be able to marry 12-year-olds. I would think it's abhorrent, but I wouldn't shut that down.
Sorry, continue.
Yeah, I wouldn't censor that person from having that belief. I think there is value in knowing who believes that kind of thing, right? I think there's a lot of value in knowing who the Nazis are in the room, right, so to speak. But I wouldn't allow them to act on it, right? I think that society can enforce its laws. And I think the laws of you don't get to perform human sacrifice, even if it's your religious belief. You don't get to rape people, even if it's your religious belief. You don't get to marry kids, even if it's your religious belief. I think that's where I would draw the line. But I would keep the ceiling high on that, right? Into those cases, like the FLDS. I'm not familiar with the Duggar family. I can't comment on. But the FLDS things, the fundamentalists, Latter-day Saints, absolutely. That's a very, very high bar that you need to clear. Someone who marries 4 women, a Muslim who marries 4 women, I don't think that's necessarily abusive, and I think we can and should tolerate, so to speak, with that.
All right.
So I wanted to address that, and then I wanted to talk to not Poppy, Zena, sorry. And I hear you, right? When you say that there are people still pushing for very homophobic, transphobic, racist things, that absolutely is the case. I am not saying or advocating we do nothing by tolerating them. I think tolerating it is a positive action that will help to fix it. It won't solve it. It won't solve all of it. It's not doing nothing. It is, in fact, combating it through killing them with kindness is probably the wrong way to put it, but by being better than they are. I think that it won't fix all of it, but I think it will fix a lot of it. And it's unfortunately going to have setbacks, and it's going to be a long time. You are right in that we can't just expect it to happen. We have to work towards it happening. That's why I advocate for people to be better and to be to turn the other cheek in a lot of ways. Anyway,
okay, great. Thank you.
Sorry,
I'm going to let...
I
No, it's okay. I'm going to let Zena respond. And then I'm going to give Star Panda. You've been quiet. If you want to make a comment, feel free. Matt, you too. And we'll go in that order. So Xena, Star Panda, Matt, and then we're gonna change it up a little bit. So please.
Yeah. I'm honestly finding like the tolerant talk to feel like doomerism right now, because it doesn't really feel like you actually have like a lot of ways to actually deal with this stuff. If we're talking about child brides, for one, that's already a big deal, like in the political scene. We already know that there's massive issues with that, because there are some really conflicting laws with how children are able to represent themselves. Okay, and they can't actually get out of those situations because of conflicting laws, and this all depends on what state you're in. We also have data about this that describes how harmful this is to kids. That's a thing, right? So like that's already covered. And as far as like the tolerance, like, yeah, we might not be able to reach every single person in every single corner of the world, but the more we can add in, education in our schools, education in our cities, okay, the better we are. And this can be any kind of religious tolerance, including various groups. Most schools already have clubs that are geared towards this. There's ones called WISH, Will Intolerance Stop Here. A lot of schools have some form of a gender sexuality alliance or other versions of, diversity clubs, right? And the thing that I would advocate for is absolutely backing them up, giving them more resources to do the work, and also like support policy decisions that some of these groups are working towards. We've had cases where, like, at my community college, we worked with our school to get preferred names on everybody's IDs, and that be allowed. And that was extremely effective in reaching the entire school for, for helping like diversity and tolerance. And we can do similar things with religion and making sure that like everyone actually has access to education about this.
Sure. Can I ask just
very
I was just going to finish up what I was going to say, because we got to let other people take a turn.
Hang on. So Xena, finish up very quickly. Wick, I'm going to give you a couple seconds to reply. Then it's going to be Star Panda. We're going to proceed as before. Please.
Yeah. Right. God damn it, I lost it. Anyways, doing this with tolerance stuff, making sure that everyone has access to education, and I would also include access to education be including anyone who is in the homeschool or unschooling or any of those like outside of a public school focus as well, to also address the cases that are on the fringe, like Fairy Queen has been talking about.
Okay. Wick, brief reply, and then we're going to go to Star Panda.
Yeah. Recently, a 12-year-old boy was sent home from school from wearing a shirt that says, "There are only two genders." Do you support that action?
Being sent home?
Mm-hmm. He got, I don't know if he got suspended. I don't know if he received any other disciplinary action, but he wore a shirt that said there are only two genders, right? And he was sent home.
Yeah, I mean, there's trans kids. What does that say to them?
Yeah, the same way I would send home a kid who's wearing a flat earther shirt.
No, hang on.
And beer shirts.
I think.
Okay, we need to make a digression on that in a moment, because that's an interesting distinction there. Star Panda, I'm going to let you weigh in if you would like, very quickly.
Sure. So, I think I have two things. Like, real quick. There are rules in school, like from what was said just now. There are rules in school for what you can wear. And usually, even if like you have a beer shirt or like inappropriate attire, you'll be sent home or told to change that shirt. Like, this doesn't just happen with like people who have, just like political statements on their shirts, right? I'm sure someone who is who's like super lefty kid will also be sent home if they have like an Antifa shirt or something. But like for something else, for before, what Wick and Zena and Poppy were talking about, there was something that you said. I don't mean to take umbrage with everything you say, but like you did say before that I guess generally that our rights were getting better, or like it was getting better for minorities. For gay and black people, I would say it has gotten a little bit better. Specifically, like certain things have gotten better, certain things have gotten worse. But in particular, I would say, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, like anyone, but for trans people, it has gotten significantly worse because in the 50s, I remember there being, like, not me personally, but like I remember seeing articles from the 50s being like, not trans, but like a man becomes a woman, and it was all like celebratory and stuff. Like it was a GI or something who had become a woman and gotten these surgeries. Like there was no ill will in that. And nowadays we have so many like conservative news sources who are going after trans people, like for pretty much anything, like just being existing, basically. And then there's the fact that there's like 500, 600 plus anti-trans laws that are going through. Some of them being stricken down, but they're all going through, like to restrict people's rights, specifically to target trans people, trans kids, and all that. So I think in that way, trans people are getting a lot of the brunt of all that, and it's getting significantly worse, very clearly.
Two questions.
Very, very quickly, Wick. Matt?
I don't mean, like, sorry. I can shut up if you guys want me to, right? It's just...
No, I just want to, I want to let the people who are in the sequence go first, and then you can reply. So we just hold that thought for a second.
No, let them go first.
Yeah. Matt, please.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to comment very briefly about some of the rhetoric that we're using to describe this, because I think it'd be helpful to interrogate that a little bit. I'm deeply fond, as Wick is, of Dr. King's statement that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. I think that is a spectacular example of progressive rhetoric. Not only that, it's quite telling that it comes from a Christian socialist or a democratic socialist. That really demonstrates, again, how it is that you can integrate religion very successfully for progressive causes. People often forget that the most successful religious movement in this country's history, in terms of advancing a religiously tinged politics, was the civil rights movement, followed quickly by the American evangelical movement, which is deeply disappointing when you think about Ronald Reagan. But one of the things that I think is problematic about Dr. King's splendid statement is that it does imply that there's a kind of direction to history. In academia, we usually call it like a telos, right? That's the pretentious word for it. And it can be very tempting for many progressives to buy into this idea that once we've won rights for X, Y, or Z group, they're there, they're not going away, and there's really nothing that can be done to take them away. I think that we've seen, as many people have articulated here, very clearly on the trans issue, that is not the case when it comes to many things, right? Oftentimes, if you look at this country's history around things like, say, racial equality, it's been one step forward, two steps back, or two steps forward, one steps back, depending upon the time period, Reconstruction, desegregation. And I think we're seeing something very similar right now when it comes to the attempt to achieve human dignity for trans citizens in the United States of America, where there have been strides taken, certainly since, say, 2002, 2003 with Lawrence v. Texas, and a few other decisions that were essential in advancing the queer community. But the level of vitriol that I've seen directed against trans individuals is incomparable with anything else I've seen in my lifetime, which includes the immense wave of Islamophobia that broke out during the War on Terror. And this makes me very deeply concerned that the arc of the moral universe will not bend towards justice when it comes to security for trans individuals. It may very well bend towards very, very serious danger, especially in many red states. I don't even think it will. It might. It is bending in that direction. So I just think it's very important for us to inoculate ourselves against this temptation of assuming that just because we've won very partial dignity for a X, Y, or Z given group that has been long dominated, that is secure forever, and that there aren't millions of people out there who would be very happy to claw back those rights and then go back even further if you're somebody like Terrence Thomas, if the opening was available to them.
If I can be permitted a brief comment before I move to Fairy Queen, and then we'll let Wick respond to the addresses made towards him. I think in addition to that, Matt, something else that might enter into the calculus as well is, even if the overall arc of history tends toward justice, the arc seems to have teeth where you have in the last century alone like a significant number of situations where on balance, does the justice actually compensate in the end for the immense level of deliberate destruction of entire human groups in the process? Fairy Queen,
I think that's well said, yeah.
If you could be very brief, Wick has a few things to respond to. I don't want him to lose his thought, so please go fast.
Of course. I have a very brief question that is very similar to Wick's. So he mentioned like the case of the boy that went home, that was sent home for the shirt. I'm going to give you the example of the Supreme Court case with the Westboro Baptist Church. Do you think that they made the correct decision? Do you agree with the Supreme Court case decision?
Can you specify what that is for the audience, for those who aren't familiar?
Yes. So this is Snyder versus Phelps. This is a case. This is a landmark decision, and I'm reading off of Wikipedia. It's 2011, in which the Supreme Court held that speech made in a public place in a matter of public concern cannot be the basis of liability for emotional distress, even if the speech is viewed as offensive or outrageous. So for context, the Westboro Baptist Church often would picket fence at the funerals of veterans. They would often have signs that would say, and I won't say it on stream, but horribly homophobic statements about gay people like going to hell. And this speech was supported. It was upheld that they have a right to have this public display. What are your thoughts on that? Because I think that's the gesture of what Wick is getting at, right?
Okay.
It's
Okay, thank you very much. So, Wick, you've been addressed by 2-3 people. I'm going to give you a few minutes to make a reply, okay?
Sure. That, Fairy Queen, thank you for that, because that plays into kind of my argument here, that we may be getting a little lost in this sauce. So one of the reasons I oppose almost any legislation to combat intolerance, almost any. There's, again, in extremis, like when kids are being abused and things like that, we can make exceptions. But because any tool, any mechanism, any procedure that we fashion in order to combat this, if we believe, and I do, that there exists systemic discrimination against minority groups, such as trans individuals, such as gay individuals, such as black individuals, we can recognize how these tools that we give the system are going to be used, again, whether intentionally or not, to primarily hurt those groups, because of course they are. Because of course.
Do you have data on this?
Do I have data on this? You want me to have data on whether or not a
like non-discrimination policies all across the board already have religion in them by and large. So like what you're saying seems to be a conflict with that's already there. Like you're saying that is being used, essentially, that sort of thing is being used to further discriminate against religious groups. But I don't think that's what those.
Okay,
I've never seen data that's actually a thing that happens.
Okay, finish
when
your
that's
point.
been legislated.
Okay, now Wick, respond.
Okay. So I'll give you some examples of how this is used, right? We can look at DeSantis is passing these laws. You can't picket in front of, you can't demonstrate in front of, very, very anti-First Amendment laws, right? To stop people from trying to demonstrate in front of politicians' houses or things like that, or really controlling when and where you can demonstrate these things. These aren't going to hurt the politicians. These aren't going to hurt the people in power.
Religious focused. Like,
right?
Do you have something that's religious focused though?
Just
like
religious
we're talking about
well, again, an example of a kid being sent home. And I think the courts upheld this. I could be wrong about this. It might be still going through the courts. But again, a kid being sent home from wearing a shirt that says there are only two genders, and that is kind of religious, right?
Okay, so I think for clarification here, I think what Xena is asking is, in this case, given that we are talking about differing religious beliefs, do we blanketly consider something religious, quote unquote, if we draw a connection to a religion sort of outside of the location itself? And does that in some way ameliorate the fact that it is still a message that is targeting a group that is represented in the classroom, say?
So this is why we can't make these laws, because it's so up to and open to interpretation. I think that if you ask 10 different people whether or not Christians believe that there are only two genders, most of them will say that yes, that's a Christian kind of belief. Whether that's accurate or not, I don't want to get into the debate. I think that we can see, at least through the rhetoric of a lot of Christians in media and in general, that we see that as the case. Matt mentioned that we can't take advantage of this idea or that we can't expect these rights not to be stripped away. Again, the way that they are going to be stripped away is through building these tools to take down misinformation, disinformation, all these things. Well, as soon as Trump gets into power again, if he does, if God forbid, in 2024, Trump is elected president again, right? He's going to use these tools that we have built in order to destroy and to target these groups. We saw this happen with the filibuster. In 2013, Harry Reid did the nuclear option, if you will, about the filibuster, where he said, "Okay, you can't filibuster presidential appointees," right? And so that was intended because the Republicans were really filibustering Obama's appointees, and so Harry Reid's like, "No, we're going to shut this out. We're gonna stop you from abusing the system like this." Mitch McConnell in 2016 is like, "Okay, you open this door, we're going to walk through it." And he made it impossible to filibuster Supreme Court nominees. And we all know what happened. We had the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And so, while I wouldn't put the blame on Harry Reid for this, I don't think he is directly responsible in that way. We can recognize that he made it easier for the Republicans to enact this thing, that we saw rights being stripped away from half the population because we decided we wanted to change the rules to try to stop this intolerant kind of pressures being. So that's a very recent example. We can go back further.
But that doesn't
Very
line
quickly,
up with...
Xena, I'm going to let you reply, and then Fairy Queen.
Yeah. A lot of... the Roe v. Wade hasn't...
Too, please.
Okay.
Yeah, Poppy's got one after me as well.
I had my hand up for a while.
Do you want to go first, or do you want me to?
Respond to Wick, and then I will... I have mine.
To go real quick, the Roe v. Wade example kind of goes against the whole thing that you've been advocating for this whole time, which is that you don't want to use state power to interfere to, like, spread progressive values. Okay.
No. Maybe I miscommunicated. My advocacy is we can't use state power to oppress groups that we find anti-progressive.
Right. But that, if a group is anti-Roe v. Wade or anti-abortion, like, the state's still overruling that. Like, that's still a thing. And then as far as all the other examples, like, you've just brought up a lot of, like, politician examples, and I'm having a really hard time with this because this is a panel about reconciling with religion, and a lot of your examples aren't really on point. And so a big thing that we've been noticing as trans people is that the laws, in fact, that are supposed to protect people are being used to protect the really toxic ends of religion. The very same policies that are being used to protect trans people sometimes get twisted around to do the opposite. And that's an example that's contradicting what you've been trying to say.
Okay, very quickly. Just very, very quickly, Wick. Fairy Queen, was your point pertaining directly to this conversation?
Not precisely.
Okay, can you hold that thought? I'm going to let Poppy go. I'm going to let Wick respond to both of you, and then we'll let Matt go, and then I'm going to let you go, all right?
Yeah,
I think Fairy Queen was ahead of me, so... And then I think Star Panda wanted to say something, so you can put me last.
Okay, I just don't want to cut the flow of this.
I will try to be succinct. So back to the shirt, because this keeps coming up. Yeah, send the fucking kid home. Like, I'm going to be really clear. This is decided. I don't want to have a debate about genders, because let's be very clear. The DSM-5 clearly outlines that within the notion of gender dysphoria, it specifically outlines that a person who has gender dysphoria either wishes to be the other gender, i.e. within the masculine-feminine spectrum, or another gender. This has already been outlined for like the last 10 years, give or take. Like, this is literally my job. I literally diagnose people with this so they can get gender-affirming surgeries. So, like, the idea that, like, that kid gets to wear that? No, I go back to my original statement. This would be like some dumbass kid wearing a flat earther shirt to his science class. No, send that fucking kid home. That kid wears hate speech, send him home.
Well, and if anything, actually work with the kids too if you get the opportunity.
The other thing I wanted to add on to is that, so you were talking about should they have upheld that the West Bureau Baptist Church was allowed to say these things? No. We have rules against obscenity. I do not trust a bunch of people in random gowns who get, without any say and without any checks and balances, to make random decisions about what they think the law works to. We already know we have activist judges on the Supreme Court. They have several times gone with freedom of religion as an excuse to allow bigotry. And they literally went back on previously held legal tendencies to get rid of Roe v. Wade.
Okay.
An unprecedented thing in the court. Fuck them.
Okay, very quickly. Wick, respond briefly, please, and then Fairy Queen, and then Matt.
Try. But this kind of gets... I know we want other people in. I'm trying not to, but I seem to be the only one holding this position. So
well, that's why I'm granting you the opportunity to respond. Yeah.
So I think Xena, right? Xena's the one on the right. Okay, Xena's the one on the right. So you mistake. These laws aren't meant to protect minorities. They're meant to protect everyone, and that's the thing. We can't. As soon as we
these laws
hang on, Xena. Let him reply.
Yeah. As soon as we weaken this shield for the people you find disgusting and abhorrent, and I don't disagree on a lot of these, right? I think that the Westboro Baptist Church is disgusting and abhorrent. But as soon as we weaken the shield that protects them, we weaken the shield that protects you. It's a shield that protects us all. And that I strongly disagree with Poppy that I think it's okay for someone to have a very wrong belief, unscientific belief, untrue belief, and say, I believe this, I think this is true. I think that because we are so bad at figuring out what is true, we do not have a way to know forever that something is true. And because humans and society and culture and the state are really, really bad at saying this, free speech and freedom of expression is a tool that protects us from being trapped in false beliefs. If it was not for freedom of speech,
it will not protect you from me. So you're gonna
have the rights that you have today.
Okay,
Wick, so take them away now because we have powers.
Hold that thought. Fairy Queen, you, Matt, and then I'm going to let Poppy reply. Star Panda, if you would like to reply as well.
Quick?
Who?
Can I have a meta thing real quick? As we're going through this conversation,
please,
trying to specify exactly like which laws you're talking about or which policies would be really, really helpful, because that's why I'm actually getting lost. I didn't mean to interrupt you earlier. Just I really am struggling because when we say these laws, that could mean like anything, and there have been numerous attempts over history for stuff.
Okay.
And so if we could just try and specify,
we're going to be going directly into that very. Hang on, we're going to be going into that very directly shortly. Fairy Queen,
good.
Please. Yeah, you'll have an opportunity to bring that point up again. Fairy Queen, please.
Yes. So I am going to come in support of Wick. And the reason why I am going to is because I'm hearing a lot of terms. I'm hearing harm, I'm hearing offensive. You mentioned the word obscenity. I mean, to be very, very clear, like the obscenity test, Naked Lunch passes the obscenity test. Lady Chatterley's Lover passes the obscenity test. A Tropic of Cancer. Like, these are all, with maybe the exception of Lady Chatterley's Lover, which I think is a lovely book, which everybody should read. These other two books, I'm sorry, they're straight up pornographic trash. And they were landmark cases that allowed it's the reason why you can watch South Park and why that doesn't fall underneath the obscenity law, right? So I'm not sure why we're bringing up obscenity when it seems that we have plenty of things that are able to get by just fine, right? But they aren't prosecuted or persecuted for obscenity law, simply for being offensive. Number two, I've heard the word hate speech. It depends on where you are. I don't know. I'm assuming by the lilt in everyone's voices here that you are either American or Canadian, though I obviously don't know that for certain, right? But it's worth mentioning
Canada.
Okay, Canada? Okay. Well, it's worth mentioning that at least in the United States, I just quickly Googled, I don't think hate speech is technically a legal term in the United States. Certainly, if somebody goes and spray paints, let's say, a racial slur on I don't know, let's say they spray paint a racial slur on an ethnic minority's garage, right? Obviously, that's something that they're going to be arrested for, but that's not because they're not allowed to write the slur. It's because they have trespassed, first of all, on the person's property, and it's because they're harassing them, right? So talking about hate speech, that's going to necessarily apply to where you are located in the world, right? If you're in Canada or if you're in the UK, you can probably reasonably talk about the hate speech laws.
Really
I don't know.
I don't think they were arguing the legality of hate speech.
Well, but I think that it's important to talk about the legality of it because we're talking about the involvement of the state in what you're able to say and what you're allowed to think or believe. So
but we're talking about this in a school setting, aren't we?
But we're also talking about like,
schools are the state. Schools are run by.
Okay, hang on. Let these two develop this a little bit. Continue, please.
So I work as a public school teacher, and that school is not the state. I mean, I grant you, it's not a judicial system, it's not a prison, but don't kid yourself. I mean, it is run by the state, right? It is the state. It's public funding, it's public land, it's a state-approved curriculum. You, as a teacher, you have to be licensed specifically within that state in order to work there, so much so that you have to make sure to apply for a new license if you're going to teach in a different state. I do not necessarily, the different states teach different history depending on like what county you might even live in. The books might even be different. It is absolutely a product of the state. So much so that it's even the case that some religious families will send their children to parochial school to avoid having any influence from the state.
Have you finished your thought, Fairy Queen? Star Panda, please reply.
Yes.
I just want to ask a really quick question. Do you think schools should have a dress code?
Do I think they should have a dress code? I don't know, and I'm going and so there are two ways I can answer that question, right? There's the I know it's frustrating. There's the I can answer to you what would be easiest for me as a public school teacher, what I would like to see my students do. I can answer in that, and I can answer in the other realm, which is, do we as a state have the right to enforce a dress code upon our students, right? It's this second hand that I am not certain of. So you have.
So in New York, it's legal to be topless. Should we enforce that?
It's the if it is again within schools, is it legal for
By
children?
just very quickly. So by enforce that, do you mean should the right to be topless be sustained on school property? Is that
yes?
Okay.
So
all it takes is one kid taking a picture with a cell phone.
Hang on, Poppy.
I would assume that the answer to that is no, for the same reason why. Just because you have the right to go buy a beer at the local bar doesn't mean that Johnny, who's 12, gets to go up and slam back some Jack Daniels, right? Well, there are some rights that you as a child, you might have them as a human being when you reach the age of adulthood. You don't have them when you walk into the school gates, right? We do, the rights that you have as a child are different than the ones that you have as an adult.
Right, you don't have those rights when you walk through the school gates. So like when you have
hang on.
some kind of speech, when you have some kind of speech on your shirt, which will cause distress in certain people, I think they should be allowed to send that kid home.
Well, to be very clear, I don't think so. I looked into the legal background for this case, and I don't think that the legal reason why the kid is sent home is because it causes emotional distress within the classmates. The reason why, so a corollary to this is a student that comes to a school that has the Confederate flag on their shirt, right? As a different example.
Can I very quickly? I don't mean to interrupt you, but I want to reorient the discussion a little bit. Suppose we flip the example, and I'm curious how you both would carry this forward. Because I think there seems to be two things that are sliding in here. There's the inappropriateness of the dress wear, and then there's the nature of that inappropriateness, whether it's because it causes offense, whether because it targets a group, whether because it's intrinsically obscene, something like that. When I'm listening to this conversation, the immediate flip side that I hear, that sort of melds these two sides together a little bit, is it was very distressing at one point in time, or such was the argument at least, for there to be black students in university. So how, in the light of that, how would you parse this out? How would you parse these different things out? What would be the precise reason that you would give for why the offense of one should be permitted and the offense of the other shouldn't, or whether blanketly they all shouldn't be?
Could I weigh in on that, actually? Because that's related to the comment I want to make anyway.
Be my guest, then Fairy Quinn, I interrupted you, and then Star Panda, please reply. Continue.
Okay. So I think this is actually at the heart of the conceptual and normative puzzle that we're trying to sort out here. And there are two things that I wanted to say about this. The first is that there is evidence that compelled integration does work and does have positive and ameliorative effects in the long run. Now, on the LGBTQ issue, there isn't as much historical data to draw upon, but let's take the issue of desegregation of schools along racialized lines. It's very important to note that this was not brought about as a result of long and tedious arguments that eventually compelled people to abandon segregation, right? We could very well still have segregation as far as many people in the South are concerned if it wasn't for Brown v. Topeka, where the Supreme Court essentially said, it's over, move on, get on with your life.
It's just in a different way, but go on.
Sorry. And then, Dwight Eisenhower, against his own inclination, forcibly sent troops, basically told George Wallace that, it's not going to really matter, and gradually schools were integrated over time. And it's worth noting, to build upon Wick's analysis, Danielle Allen has a very good book on this called Talking to Strangers, where she talks about how it was actually a combination of legal reforms coupled with the fact that people were now compelled to interact with one another on an interpersonal basis that led to very marginal shifts in attitudes that gradually compounded over time. And the example she gives that actually speaks to Fairy Queen's point is that for a lot of students who went to these schools, now desegregated, this would be their first encounter with a white professional who was treating them sometimes a little bit coldly, but with a certain degree of respect because there was a white teacher. And the same is true inversely, where a lot of whites felt that, well, we now have to interact with blacks, and our attitude is going to have to shift in response to that. And the ties of loyalty that emerged as a result of this are gradually, according to Allen at least, what ameliorated the circumstances. So I don't necessarily think that that's an either or in terms of should we use the state to compel integration, or should we look to interpersonal examples and the social cultural realm? I think the two can go hand in hand, as it very much did in the history of this country when it came to racial issues. The other thing that I want to say that I think makes us uncomfortable is that these kinds of examples of compelled integration and compelled liberalization are the ones that the right is very adept at weaponizing to try to accuse the left of hypocrisy, which is what I think that many of us are concerned about here. And I'll just give a good example drawn from the post-liberal tradition, since I know Eudaimonia isn't here. One of the arguments people like Adrian Vermeulen, very famous legal scholar, Catholic, will make, or Patrick Deneen, very famous conservative intellectual, will make, is listen, liberals are just as intolerant as conservatives, because if they get their hands on state power, they will use it in order to ban the expression of conservative views wherever it is that they want. The only difference, therefore, between liberals and conservatives is we are open about the fact that we have a theological viewpoint that condemns certain kind of activities, and we are willing to use state power in order to advance that, whereas liberals aren't willing to be honest with themselves or others because they constantly flip back and forth between saying we're neutral and we want to be tolerant and allow everyone into these spaces and saying, no, you're not allowed to do this and you need not apply. And I think that that is a bogus argument. I certainly think that there are gradations of toleration that one can show in a society, and that liberalism and progressivism and indeed democratic socialism does a lot better at integrating people regardless of their background and normative views, certainly than a socially conservative Catholic or evangelical state would. But it is a tricky puzzle that we have to think through. And I do think that a combination of compelled integration by law and the use of state power with interpersonal examples and a shifting cultural conversation on these issues is probably the way things are going to go, and the way that we're eventually going to get to the shining city on the hill that we all seem to be wanting the United States to become in Canada.
Thank you very much. Fairy Queen, I interrupted you. If you wanted to respond first, you have the prerogative.
Thank you. I do want to shift away, and I agree. I understand why we are discussing these interpersonal case by case, like the Confederate flag shirt and like the kid that was sent home with the shirt. But the gesture of the question, the reason why I brought up the case of the Westboro Baptist Church, right? The question isn't, would it be good for society? The question isn't whether it would improve society. The question is, do we have a right to do these things, right? Do you have the right to stand out with your picket fence? Do you have the right to have 4 wives and to have the state not put its nose in your business? Why do you have the right to have this? On what basis do you have this right? In the United States, the basis is the Constitution. The basis is this a constitutional law? Does this law follow the Constitution, which we find through legal precedent, right? And this is a problem that what you're going to find, especially within extremist like fringe communities, is they are not going to respect the law as it exists, because they're going to ask the natural question, which is, where do we get these rights? And the answer is, we get them from God, right? In which case, why do I give a damn about what rights you have in the Constitution? These are the rights that I have enlisted within my scriptures, right? These are the rights that I have, right? Which is the reason why you have people that are willing to break the Constitution and are willing to break the law in order to do things like uphold the FDLPS.
I'm glad you went in that direction, because that actually segues directly into where I would like the conversation to go now. Because naturally, and you're going to go first, don't worry, we're going to go counterclockwise this time. naturally, when we are talking about issues of toleration, we are also talking about the threshold beyond which rights are in some sense curtailed. We are talking about like what is to be allowed or disallowed at some level inevitably. That seems to be embedded in that discussion. However the disallowance or the allowance takes place, whether it's through social pressures or whether it's through legal pressures enforced at the barrel of a gun. If we can give our positions on the threshold, if indeed there is one, maybe some of you are absolutists when it comes to this, I would like us to go counterclockwise in that direction, to give a brief, emphasis on brief, try to keep it to within a minute, statement on that, and then we're going to open the floor again for about 15 minutes, and then we're going to let call-ins come in. Very quickly, if you want to call into this conversation, we have room for one slot at a time. Join the Discord server pinned at the top of the chat. We'll try to get through as many of you as possible while respecting the time of the guest, so you won't be on for long, but you will be able to ask a pointed question, and I will allow you to reply. All right, Poppy and whichever one of you wants to go first. I'm going to let you both go, Poppy and Xena. Try to keep it to 1 minute each, okay?
Sure. Could you repeat the prompt, though, because I want to make sure I understand what you're asking.
Absolutely. So when we are talking about questions of toleration, we are fundamentally talking at some level about at what point, where is the threshold at which rights may be curtailed? Is it low? Is it high? Is it at the point only of harm? Is it at the point of offense? Is it at the point of prospective offense, prospective harm, etc., or however else you want to reorient that? But if that clarifies things, yeah, please.
So this actually goes into what I was going to say. Is so one of the things I have a frustration with Fairy Queen about is that I feel like she's conflating offense versus harm, like extremely. So, like, for example, we were talking about things that the Supreme Court has ruled on as far as that are art. Like, these are things are protected under free speech because they are defined under that artistic ideal. Well, comparing that to the Westboro Baptist Church, who makes hate speech flat, like, signs, like, these are not the same thing. And so to me, like, this feels like a false equivalency. It also feels very strange to me. Like, again, my question is always, what does systemic harm? The Westboro Baptist Church did harm. The people who are making the laws against trans people, my people, are doing harm because they want us to commit suicide and die. I am really frustrated with a lot of the people here that aren't queer, or at least as far as I can tell, aren't queer, because it feels like this feels like a lot of like mental masturbation, when in reality this is, hey, depending on who wins the presidency, I could end up in a mass grave. So can we please, like, actually, instead of jerking off about where these lines are, let's talk about where these things actually do very real systemic, very real societal harm. The Westboro Baptist Church did harm. That was their intentional goal. That's what their stated goal was.
All right. Thank you very much. That's about a minute.
Easy go.
Yes.
Going off of that, I'm very much still on the belief that things that interfere only with you as a singular person and only inside of you, cool, fine, whatever. Okay? I don't care what people think. Not like hugely, okay? The problem is when beliefs and certain stuff lead to actions and how you start interacting with other people. At the point where you are acting with others, we're in a society, and at that point, that's where we start to ask the questions of what's appropriate ways to treat each other and what isn't. What are legally protected ways? And what are ways that, like, the legal system can come down on you if you start hurting others? So, yeah, offense versus harm still takes into account, the individual versus the group, and that's where we got to figure out what's going on there and how much harm is actually being done.
Thank you very much. Are you concluded?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Right. Wick, please try to keep it within a minute if you can.
I'll do my best. So I think the threshold, there is a threshold. There is a line. I just think it's way up there. It's very, very high. I allow a lot of harm to be done, right? I think that we should allow. Society does not have the right, just because there will be some harm, to stop all these things. We cannot save people from all harms. We simply cannot, because to try to do so will be an even greater harm, in my opinion. Where I know this will be frustrating, but I don't know where the exact line is. I don't. I am not smart enough to be able to make that distinction. I don't pretend to be. I can point out extreme examples, as these are obviously over that line, such as, again, child marriage, I would like the state to step in for that, right? Human sacrifices, things like that, obviously. But the Westboro Baptist Church did harm, but I think that trying to shut them down would, in the long run, do more harm. And that's my statement.
Okay, it's a good line to end on. Star Panda, please.
I apologize. Can you repeat the question again?
Absolutely. So when we're talking about questions of toleration, we're talking about questions of, at some point, there's going to be a threshold beyond which you curtail someone or some group's rights to some kind of action. Where do you think that threshold lies, or should lie, if indeed you do? Maybe you're an absolutist about these kinds of things. You don't think the law should curtail verbal positions or ideas at all. I rather suspect that's not the case, but just laying out the question as originally.
So I think ultimately, like, where we should be with how much harm we allow. I think we should do our best to curtail as much harm as we can while giving as much people freedom as we can. Obviously, there's going to be disagreements. Right now, there's court cases going through about people essentially like using their religion to justify things that are very harmful to people. And it doesn't really matter if it's constitutional, they're still putting it through. And these kinds of things, I think, should be curtailed because it's going to do a massive amount of harm to people. Not only to those minority groups, but to the people who they're trying to, I guess, like, keep as the norm or whatever. So, essentially, I think that... sorry, there's a little bit of an echo that's going on.
It's not noticeable on our end, so you're good.
Yeah. Basically, I think... God, the line. I don't think intolerance should be tolerated, essentially. Like, you can believe what you want to believe. I don't care. Like, Westboro Baptist Church can exist. They can say what they want. But, like, once they're going to events that are designated for specific people who want to be in a safe place, I think that crosses a line. And there should be steps that we can move towards protecting those people a little more than just allowing Westboro Baptist Church to get right up to that line of being harassment, or in some cases crossing that line.
Thank you very much. Matt.
I wanted to say that I think one of the foundational semantic problems in thinking through these difficulties is the fact that a lot of the way that people think through issues of free speech and religion in this country are through the language of the Constitution. And the American Constitution is a very crude document in many respects, particularly in terms of the grammar of rights that it deploys. So if you look at the U.S. Constitution, for example, it tends to guarantee rights to freedom of expression in very absolutist terms. And, you know, there's a nice American quality to that. You know, think about New Hampshire, you know, live free or die. And yet, in practice, of course, we know that the right to freedom of expression in this country has never been granted, absolutely. And I'm sure that Fairy Queen could give you numerous different examples that'd be more articulate than I could. But, you know, since United States versus Ulysses, at the very least, the general orientation of the jurisprudence of the court has been to take freedom of speech rights very, very seriously, and to only compromise them in very selective instances. Sometimes I think to a repellent degree, if you think about something like Citizens United, where apparently corporations are now entitled to politic if they wish, and to spend money to politic. All that's to say, I think that it would be far more easy if we were to adopt a different kind of grammar if they're thinking through about these issues, and recognize that any kind of rights that we have in a liberal society are subject, and this is Canadian language, to reasonable limitations. And that includes on issues like hate speech, for example. And I think that the rule that has been adopted by Canadian courts is a lot more exact and a lot more reasonable than what you find in American courts. And the general rule of thumb when it comes to freedom of expression is that Canada tends to be broadly tolerant, even of hate speech. However, it becomes much more stringent in allowing hate speech in settings where there are particularly vulnerable communities, especially children who might be harmed by it. A very famous case involved a school teacher called Mr. Keekstra, excuse me. Mr. Keekstra propagated neo-Nazi propaganda in a high school, and that was within his rights to freedom of expression. But the Supreme Court decided that no, you cannot propagate neo-Nazi material to children. And there are similar cases when it comes to things like the promotion or the sale of child pornography or allowing cyberbullying, you name it. And I think that we have to assess this on a case-by-case basis, ascertaining who is particularly vulnerable to expressions of hate speech. And there's no firm rule that we can apply in those circumstances, but a loose rule that says that we can inhibit the expression of speech in circumstances where it does not contribute very much to society, as neo-Nazi speech does not. And the expression of this speech really damages a vulnerable community that we have reason to be particularly concerned about in these circumstances. So that, I think, is the better way of approaching these things. And I think that the unfortunate reality is that as long as we continue to rely upon the inadequate grammars of American constitutionalism and its absolutist viewpoints on rights, it's going to be very difficult to culturally have these conversations, which is why, frankly, we need to abandon various forms of constitutional idolatry and try to think about these things from a more pragmatic viewpoint.
Thank you very much. Fairy Queen, please.
Well, as much as I agree with most of your takes tonight, I'm afraid I cannot allow you as the Canadian to colonize the United States. So I am here to bat for freedom of speech, as American as that may be. I do have a couple of things to say on the note about obscenity. So this is the Miller test. This is very specifically what the Miller test for obscenity includes. So whether the average person applying community standards would find that the work taken as a whole appeals to prurient interest. So prurient is a synonym of lascivious, right? Usually that implies sexual. Normally what's implied by that is bluntly pornography, or at least it used to be until like certain landmark Supreme Court cases. Number two, whether the work depicts or describes in a patently offensive way sexual conduct specifically defined by the applicable state law. And three, whether the work taken as a whole lacks serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value, okay? So it is not true. So I grant you that like the horrible signs that they held may not necessarily have artistic value, but they do have political value in the sense that they are expressing their religious freedom of speech in a public area. And the other fact of it being that even though it's extremely offensive, it's not strictly sexual, right? This is not, they are not showing like huge giant billboards of naked people, for example, out in public, right? So I'm not sure why we would think that, and I think that's a misinterpretation.
That's not accurate, though.
All right, hang on, 1 sec. Let her finish her point.
That's not accurate.
No, hang on, Zena. Let her finish her point, and then I'll let you reply, okay? Fairy Queen.
Well, I apologize, Zena, but I literally am reading directly what the Miller test is. That is the Miller test. That is what the Miller
about
test is.
what you're saying.
Hang on, no, Zena. I'm letting you all go around and make
ahead,
your statement, so I need to let her do that. Continue, please.
But secondly, the question is, at what threshold do we restrict someone's freedom of speech? Or restrict somebody's rights? Is that sort of the question? Is it more directed at freedom of speech or rights? Is that...
Finish your statement, and then I'm going to let you do it back and forth. Yeah.
I would say, to broadly address the question that you proposed, my answer is at the moment that your right violates somebody else's right. That's the minute that you restrict somebody else's ability. You have the right, for instance, to go in to buy a gun at the local store, right? You don't have the right to go to somebody's house and to shoot up the windows, right? You have the right to write as many offensive things as you please. You just don't have the right to go and to distribute them in a school, right?
Thank you very much. Zena, did you want to make the first comment? We're going to run for open discussion for 15 more minutes to try to keep it brief.
I don't really want to make like a commentary so much as like, I wish there would be more stepping in when people say things that are just blatantly false or inaccurate about a situation. Like when you're talking about the Westboro Baptist Church, no, they wrote awful things on their signs that were like obscenities or sexual, horrendous. Like it was not pretty. Okay.
Am I allowed to use the F slur?
No.
No. I'm
okay.
good.
That's what I'm checking. That's why I asked, because I was about to say, what is the political value of calling me that?
And so, like, I think my thing is like, if we're gonna have this discussion, like, we do need to actually like be accurate about the stuff that we're talking about, Because that's where I'm taking issue. I don't want to interrupt you, but like if you are outright saying things that are false about a situation, that is utterly misleading to the entire conversation.
So I am specifically referring to the sign, and I will not say the slur, but God hates, fill in the slur word at the end, okay? That is not a sign it is a derogatory statement. It's a hateful statement. It's a disgusting statement, but it's not a sexual statement.
That's not the only
It doesn't matter that it's sexual.
Had,
it still
though.
does harm to the community.
Well,
that's what I don't understand.
Also, that wasn't the only kind of signs that they had.
The Miller test, that's why.
I don't care about the Miller test. I'm using these terms in a generic sense, not in a legal sense. I'm talking about how do we actually prevent people like me from dying?
Did that sign...
Hang on.
No.
Wait. Finish your sentence, Poppy, quickly. Respond.
Let me just say this really quickly. Again, this is, the mental masturbation thing. We're getting lost in the weeds because, again, it's not real for you people. I don't understand this. This is so strange to me. Like, again, we have neo-Nazis in 2023. These people want us dead. And you're talking about, well, it doesn't meet the Miller test. No, it's still obscene to me.
I will respond.
It does harm.
Hang on, very quickly. Fairy Queen, if you could clarify in your response what the relevance of the Miller test is to this particular conversation as it pertains to this case.
Well, I believe Poppy specifically claimed that it violated an obscenity law, and
that's not what I said.
I believe you said it was obscenity, which is why I'm focusing on the Miller test, because it's supposed to judge what is obscenity and what's not obscenity.
No, it was obscene to me. I didn't say it was against obscenity as the Supreme Court sees it.
That was a misinterpretation. I thought you were saying it was illegal because
I was saying it could be under that. To me, that could be under that thing, because to me, if we don't allow things such as child pornography and other things because they are demonstrable harms to society, why the fuck are we letting these people do this at military funerals?
Can I chime in real quick? I think the thing with me, Zena, and Poppy is we don't care about the legality of anything right now because essentially we are being legislated out of existence. So, I don't care about what laws you bring up. I don't care, what you're saying about what should or shouldn't be legal. They want to kill me. I don't want to die. So
yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Okay.
If I could weigh in on that for a second.
Okay.
Let him go first,
Matt,
and then because I have a lot to say. So, please.
I just want to say first off, I do think that based upon my own presentation, I'm absolutely in agreement with you that the law should be doing everything it can to abet and support the trans community and the queer community. And there's certainly ways that we can go about doing that. One of which will involve, I think, transitioning the way that we think about rights and rights to expression in this country along the ways that I'm talking about. Saying that, I do think it is important to look at this from a legal standpoint because having a firm kind of comprehension of what can be achieved given current context will better allow us to use the law strategically and tactically in order to achieve the kind of gains for the community that you're looking for. And the reality is that it's a very difficult course to chart right now because the judicial system is becoming increasingly reactionary and, as you know, is dominated by 6 Supreme Court judges who have very little interest in supporting the LGBTQ community. If we look at the Dobbs decision, we see Clarence Thomas actually chomping at the bit to roll back LGBTQ rights. So I don't think that there's anything wrong with asking what can we expect the law to do in these circumstances and how can we chart the right legal course going forward. But that does mean being clear-eyed about what is obtainable at these moments. I almost have to paraphrase Gramsci right now, right? Optimism of the will, pessimism of the intellect when it comes to something like law right now.
With all due respect, I don't care what's, attainable. My dreams for attainable are whatever I can do to keep myself safe, right? And if the law doesn't allow that, then I'm going to do whatever I can to make it allow that.
What would you do to someone who held a sign like
to
that?
someone?
Yeah. What would
Nothing.
You do?
On a interpersonal level or a legal level?
Either one.
I mean, interpersonal level, I would punch them in the fucking face.
Okay.
Or stare at them very disapprovingly for a while.
I'm sorry. When you're
disapprovingly based, okay, that's fair.
When your belief is that because of who I'm attracted to or who I am is going to send me to an eternal damnation of fire, That's crazy talk. So guess what? I'm going to push back on that.
That's
sorry.
fine.
I don't care about religious beliefs in this regard. Like, I feel like we're being very protective of this in a way that makes no sense.
So maybe I can.
Okay, very, very quickly. So, Wick, please make your response.
Sure. So the reason that I care about it, because I agree with you, it's horrific. I don't disagree that these are things that we want to get out. Matt, I think we need a separate discussion at some point on your views on hate speech.
Hey, no
speech,
commercials on my panel. That's for the end of it.
That's beyond the scope of today's. I just fundamentally disagree with you. But to address Poppy here and Star Panda as well, the reason that you should care about these processes is because these processes are how we get things done. And unless you want everyone individually deciding when it's appropriate to punch someone in the face and when it's not, and I don't think we want to return to vigilantism, because that led to lynchings and all sorts of horrific things done in the name of righteousness, right?
Okay, wrap it up fast.
Then we need some sort of process, communal system in which we educate these things and say, okay, in these cases, we can perform some sort of state level of censure or violence. In these instances, we cannot and should not. And the reason that I'm saying we need to stop and not legislate or try to remove these things through hate speech laws or anything like these is because by restricting someone's right to harm or offend by words, then a lot of people are going to catch strays for that, and it's going to be a worse world overall. You're going to have more harm done to you.
Yeah, that's a good place to stop. You don't need to.
You keep using this threat that there's going to be this magic harm that's going to be used later. You haven't demonstrated that with any examples except for one that had nothing to do with religion.
Do you not remember the McCarthy era? Right, where
I do, and that had nothing to do with religion. Can you please give me a religious example where that's come back later to bite us in the ass?
This could be analogous, right? Where
I understand how analogy works. I'm very, very knowledgeable about that.
Okay, let's look at the
Can you give me an actual example?
All right.
The people who were Jewish.
Again, I still feel like this is fear mongering. I really appreciate it. It's great.
Fair enough. I think no more Mr. Nicewick. You said you would kill yourself because of the sign. Okay.
No, I said I would punch someone in the face.
Talk about fear mongering. Right?
No, I'm talking about I would punch someone in the face over sign. I'm saying that those
You've been saying over and over now if they're allowed to say what they
love
all right, this one's.
Like clearly a liberal who has no spine.
Okay. Xena did not say she would kill herself because of the sign. She was pretty clear about that.
She kept saying they want us dead. We're
true. No, but hang on. But the invocation of I will commit suicide because of the sign. That wasn't actually in anything that she said. So just for clarification,
I never said this. Please be honest. God.
All right. So it seems that the interesting point that we're kind of spilling all around here is at what point. At what point does discussion about the enforcement of thresholds for toleration, at what point does that switch to questions for the threshold of legalization? So what I mean by this for clarity is it seems like a solid half the panel, roughly, is drifting to a position where the discussion about what should we, quote-unquote, tolerate, has sort of fallen apart because the we part, the state, the law, whatever, the thing that is supposed to represent our collective judgment, that has increasingly turned categorically against their existence. And so that we is in a lot of asterisks. At which point now it becomes a question of tolerance in the form of, do you abide by the social norms that allows that we to sustain in a normal situation? It's a long-winded way to put that, but I hope that was more or less clear. In your closing statements, I would like you to comment on that, about the investment in the collective enforcement of thresholds of toleration. Where does that end? And at that point, what do you do? Does that make sense? Is everybody following that more or less? Because I can understand if you had trouble following that. That is my pathology. We're going to start from the top this time, and we're going to go back and forth. So, Matt, if you want to go first, then it's going to be Fairy Queen, then it's going to be Xena and Poppy, then it's going to be Star Panda, and then it's going to be Wick.
Thank you. So, how long do I have?
Just try to keep it brief, a minute-ish, okay?
Sure. I think if you look at the history of this country, it has consistently demonstrated a willingness to take the kind of steps that are needed to move in a progressive direction. But I also think that if one looks accurately at the history of this country, it's also demonstrated quite consistently that it is willing to take as many steps back as it is forward, and sometimes more steps back than it is forward. And I think that looking clear-eyed at the history of progress in the United States demonstrates that there will invariably be some combination of state-imposed integration and shifting cultural norms, which will occur in order to bring about a less homophobic and less transphobic society. I don't think that there's any silver bullet that is going to get us there, and I don't even think necessarily that the same policies should be applicable in one place that they would be in others. However, I do think that when it comes to evaluating which rights to prioritize, we need to recognize that there are going to be certain circumstances where certain rights might be qualified relative than others in a process of rights balancing. And I think in these kind of circumstances, the most important imperative that we should follow is to try to ameliorate the conditions of the most vulnerable individuals in our society, particularly children, and particularly trans and queer children, who I think are being very, very vulnerabilized at this point. And that's inevitably going to produce some pushback from religious groups who might say things like, listen, you're inhibiting my social freedom by not allowing me to, for instance, pass legislation that would allow me to be more active or more militant in expressing my homophobia. And I think as liberals and progressives, we need to acknowledge that there's some truth to that, right? Agent Mule's freedom is being limited if we say that he is not allowed to pass an ordinance which will admit him to discriminate against LGBTQ people. But what we should respond to that is by saying that the freedom of your right and your freedom to discriminate matters far less than the freedom of this individual to live their life as they see fit, with all the dignity and all the equality that should be attended upon that. And these are going to be difficult choices, and I don't again say that I have the answer in every circumstance. I need to think about it on a case-by-case basis. But that should be the overall principle I think that we should adopt when trying to adjudicate these extremely painful and very difficult issues.
Thank you very much. Fairy Queen, please.
If I understand your question, Sunday, just to be very, very clear, you're asking what if the state is opposed to your existence and thus does not recognize you as an individual that is deserving of rights?
Precisely. That seems to me where the stakes are dividing here. We have one side, because this was the challenge that was laid forth by Poppy and Xena at one point. There's a skin in the game question here, where one side is able to say we with the assuredness that there is a we, and the other side is not. So if you can comment on that.
Well, I will invoke Martin Luther King again, and this is the last speech that he gave before he died. And one of the things that he said just before he walked off the stage with the podium was, all we say to America is to be true to what you said on paper. If I lived in China or Russia or any other totalitarian state, maybe I could understand the denial of certain First Amendment privileges because they have committed themselves to that over there. But somewhere I read about the freedom of religion, of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read the greatness of America is to protest for your rights. The reason why the Civil Rights Act worked, the reason why they were able to push that through, the reason why that movement worked, wasn't because Martin Luther King merely claimed that it was harmful or merely claimed that it was offensive. It was because he consistently argued that these laws were illegal. That's why he uses the word illegal injunction. He is stating that, in fact, despite the fact that the United States has had a long history of discriminating against Black people within the United States, that on paper, Black people were included as a part of that we. And that in order for the law to be properly applied, they had to be considered to be a part of that we. And I think that same principle applies to trans people and applies to the struggle that many queer people are facing right now at this moment. All you have to say is be true to what you say on paper, right? If you live in the United States, that means that you get to be treated as an equal citizen with equal rights. If you live in Saudi Arabia, I'm sorry, that's going to be a different story.
Thank you very much. All right. Xena and Poppy, one of you go, and then I'm going to switch to Star Panda. I'm going to switch to Wick. I'm going to let the latter one have the final word, if that seems fair to everybody involved.
May I?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent.
All right.
So, in 1933, the Institute of Sexology was burned by the Nazis. And the reason I bring this up is because we keep talking about what's legal and what's that. My enemies don't give a fuck what's legal. They will wield the systems of power as a means by which to kill us. We've had people in Texas talk about making lists of trans people. DeSantis is literally trying to legislate us out of existence. And you can say that that's fear-mongering, but I hear this literally every day of my life. To me, I think the issue that I'm coming down to is that the problem is that everyone wants to be rational about this. They want to say, oh, it needs to be equal. We can't be hypocrites. It needs to be legal. If it's what it says on paper, then this is what it should be. But these are irrationally held beliefs by people who hold them with hate, and then they use their religion to justify this garbage. To me, your faith stops being valuable when it leads to harm towards others. And to me, the Nazis had very deeply held beliefs that then led to them burning down the Institute of Sexology, using those files, and then hunting down every single person there. And putting those people in camps, because we were the first ones to go. So again, I just have to be really clear that, like, right now as somebody who is deeply afraid to go to a red state, a lot of what you guys are saying is falling on deaf ears. I'm good.
Okay, thank you very much. Star Panda.
So, I really enjoy the conversation that's going on. Like, I know it's gotten a little bit heated, but like, I enjoy the conversation with people. Like, I don't think you guys are having any ill will or anything, but like that. What I will say is that, like, when I said I don't care about legality, it was true. That's not my job. Like, I'll leave that to ACLU and whoever else is doing that in the courts, because like I can't control that. I don't have enough knowledge. I don't have enough of that to like do anything about that, you know? And when you're asking me to think about that, what you're really asking me is to be civil about what we do in the face of people who want to kill us. Like, they're literally trying to legalize, or I'll say this. In Florida, they have a law where you can legally leave a trans person to die if it is on the basis of religion or a belief. And those kinds of laws should be unconstitutional, but they're still there, right? So I ask you to forgive me when I say, like, that shit doesn't matter to me, because they're already doing it, right? They're already coming after us. They're already creating laws that are making it illegal for us to exist. And I'm done.
Okay.
I don't want to be civil anymore, right? It's not like I'm going to be violent or anything. Like, I don't like violence. But if I need to protect myself, I'm going to protect myself.
Okay, thank you very much. Wick?
Yeah, so at the end of the day, it comes down to what we think will move the needle. What will get us and keep us, and by us I'm including every single person here, even the Canadians. You're welcome, Canadian. Okay, but we want to
Look, we burned down your White House once. We can do it again.
We want to make sure that everyone has dignity, has the right to be wrong, and the right to say what they honestly believe. Now, when it comes to actions, we can step in, right? If someone's coming to your house to take you away or something because of any reason at all, we can step in and say, hey, don't do that. We're going to stop you from doing that. But if someone wants to be wrong, I don't think we should come in, step in, and the state should stop that from happening. Hate isn't bad just because it happens to you. Hate isn't bad just because it happens to an oppressed group. Censorship isn't bad just because it happens to a oppressed group. These things are just bad, regardless of whether they happen to a bad person or a good person. These actions and these things that we do one to another are bad. Punching someone in the face, last resort, if they're coming at you. But if they're saying mean words to you and you punch them in the face, then yes, I think the state should come in and stop you. from doing that. Regardless of whether you think that you have every reason in the world to stop them from saying what they said, the state should come down with the full force of the United States government and stop you from doing that. And I would stand that, and I would bless them as they did so. But if you want to call them really mean names, if you want to be uncivil, I don't think that the state should step in. And in fact, I would stop the state if they tried to do so, to the best of my ability. That's my statement. Thank you.
Thank you. And Zena, final statement.
So, on the matter of having skin in the game, I still look at this stuff as offense versus harm and look at where the harm actually is and making sure that our response to things is in proportion with that. All right, it's one thing to say that something is mean words. It's another thing to understand what those mean words lead to. Okay, and we do have data in a lot of situations of how this applies. You could look at, trans kids or, how Muslims are treated across the country or any other demographics. And I think the biggest thing for me is that, as a society, I have a belief that, every person, when we say that dignity part, people all have needs. We all need to show up in public in some format and get our groceries. Okay, we need our car fixed, or we need transportation, or we have to show up to work. And without valuable, legal and social protections, a lot of us will just get harmed. We will lose our jobs. We'll be discriminated against at work. And this could be for religious reasons, for any number of religious reasons as well. Okay, and so I would advocate for, in any way possible, having laws that actually address the issues, right? And working towards addressing those issues. Wherever there is harm, doing what we can to minimize the damage from that is a plus in my mind.
Thank you very much. Mm-hmm. All right, so I don't see in the event server, I don't see anybody waiting. Oh, I do see one person, so we're going to bring on one guest in a moment. Before I do, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this because there's only one person waiting. Brooks for the $10 has a question for the panel. Thank you very much. I'm going to let whoever wants to respond to this respond. The question is this: why do you believe that quote-unquote religious beliefs should gain a special exception amongst all the possible reasons for you to be stupid and bad?
Because of the Establishment Clause. That's the reason. That's the short reason. Because it's in the Constitution. It's explicitly outlined as a protection that's provided to you under the American Constitution. That's.
I think that religion shouldn't have any more or less protection than anyone else's speech. I think everyone's speech should be protected.
Okay.
I think that religion is a very personal thing, and whenever it becomes not that, it becomes problematic by its nature. And to me, honestly, I don't think it should have special protections, but I also think that there are things that people should not be able to do because they promote harm. There was a statement made earlier about the use of bad words or offensive words, but again, words have systemic and long-term histories to them. There's a reason why no one on this panel can say the N-word. To me, the idea that religion is this protected thing is very strange to me, because it seems to work when it works, and it seems to not when let's be clear, evangelicals weaponize it. And that's what's been happening for the last 20 years. Last 20 years, there's been literally everything under the sun has basically been put under religious freedom because they keep abusing us with this. Well, if I had my way, it would be out of the fucking Constitution.
Anyone else?
I think that religious speech is important speech, and I think it's because the grammar of religion, or sometimes called the grammar of assent, is meant to express what each of us individually and indeed as communities take to be of highest concern or ultimate concern, metaphysically, normatively, and spiritually. And I think that therefore we should cherish our ability to interact with one another and to share our religious beliefs. However, I do think that there are limits to one's right to have one's religious viewpoints expressed within the law, particularly in a liberal and progressive society. And again, this is where I think we need to recognize that a religious person's liberty to express their religious viewpoints is something we should cherish. But their liberty to advance a homophobic or a transphobic piece of legislation and what is ultimately supposed to be a partnership where all are created equal and all are treated as equal, that is something that I have to deny.
Okay, thank you very much. Is anybody else? We do have some callers waiting, so if you don't, we can move into that. But if anybody else wants to respond to the question.
What was the question again?
The question was, why do you believe that religious beliefs should gain a special exception amongst all the possible reasons for you to be stupid and bad? And of course, we'll extend that to maybe you don't.
So I think, I guess generally, I'll answer this question. I think religion should be able to be followed if they so choose. I think people should be allowed to be stupid. But when we cross that realm into it harming someone, I think that should be curtailed. And when we talk about harm, we're not talking about, somebody's feelings are being hurt. That's not what we're talking about. When we talk about harm, we're talking about like substantial harm to oneself, like these laws that are being made, threats to our lives. And when people are gathering and, like, let's say holding signs up, saying awful things, saying we should kill ourselves, I think that is extremely harmful to people, like, in general, not just the minority group, but, like, if these kinds of ideas spread, it can spread to constitute other groups being discriminated against. And then it depends on whether you're on the in-group or the out-group, and I'll just leave that there.
Thank you. Xena, did you want to say something, or shall we move on?
I think Star Panda and Poppy covered my thoughts pretty well already, so
Okay.
I feel like we can move on.
All right, so we're going to bring on our guests one at a time. When you come on, I will give you same rough amount of time I've given our panelists to make statements. If somebody wants to respond, you may try to keep it brief. There are 4 people waiting, after which I will let the guest reply again, and then they're going to be kicked because we need to get through these reasonably quickly. So first, I'm hoping I'm getting these in the order in which they've appeared. Cascadian Unionist. Welcome. Try to keep your comment or question as brief as you can, please. But take it away, Cascadian. Oh, Cascadian is gone. All right, we're bringing in Brooks. Brooks, same deal. Try to keep it as brief and efficient as you can, your comment or your question. But please take it.
Yeah, it's mostly just a follow-up.
Oh, dear God.
Because...
Hang on. You're so loud. Let me fix that.
What the fuck?
It's because I boosted you the last time you were on. It's my bad. Sorry.
Oh, God damn it, Sunday. Does that count as my time, you dick? Did you do that on purpose?
Only if you piss me off anymore.
Fair enough. I actually just wanted to follow up on my question because I found the answers of a few panelists basically deeply unsatisfying. The question being that why is religious belief versus other generalized bigotry created as a separate thing? Why are you allowing it as a separate thing? And if your reason is literally the exception clause, I mean, there's no rules around religious belief actually as a thing. The word belief doesn't come in there. So I'd ask where exactly you as a person, why you believe religious belief versus, say, astrology or any other sort of justification a person may have for bigotry allows them to be in a place of basically treating people horribly.
Okay, very, very quickly. First of all, that looks like it was directed at Fairy Queen, so I'm going to let her reply first. Brooks, just a heads up, your
Also,
audio is...
Matt nodded.
Matt as well. Your Brooks, your microphone is like blasting. So if
It's
maybe
doing violence to me right now.
you know, actually,
I will agree with Wick.
Everyone in this panel right now.
We're actually united on this one front. You need to turn down your gain.
It isn't on my side. I'm just letting you know, Sunday. It isn't on my side.
It's definitely not on my side.
I'll just respond very briefly by saying, again, I want to reiterate that I don't believe that one's religious viewpoints are a license to be able to pass discriminatory legislation, particularly in a moment like this where the trans or the queer community are very vulnerable to the forms of discrimination and marginalization that were very powerfully articulated by Xena and Poppy and Star Panda. However, I do think that we need to respect that people's religious viewpoints matter a great deal to them, precisely because they have this character of expressing our most ultimate concerns about metaphysical, normative, and spiritual issues. And appreciating that does not mean licensing people to act on those viewpoints in any way that they wish, but it does mean respecting the gravity of those beliefs to them so that we have a good understanding of what precisely is at stake in these very, very tense political times.
I mean, I will simply go back. I'm not quite sure what the substantive difference is between your follow-up question and your original question, to be perfectly frank.
Why you allow a categorization of the difference between religious beliefs or other beliefs? Why is not just having the belief itself a thing, and that is the thing we're going to discuss? Why do you separate out religious beliefs as being basically categorically different?
Because it is spelled out as being categorically different within the Constitution. That's
It is not. The word belief isn't used there.
Okay, well, nonetheless, it is nonetheless strongly implied there. Let's see if I can find exactly what the Establishment Clause states.
While
I hate
she's
to be
finding
pedantic about this, but
while she's finding it, I again, I'll reiterate, I don't think there should be I don't think that a minority group or religious group should have their speech protected in a way that is fundamentally different from any other reason, right? I think I believe in equality in this. I think that even if you believe you're right and you're an atheist, you should be able to say what you believe, right? Mm-hmm. I just categorically would say that we should stop trying to treat different groups differently in this regard specifically.
Which is basically my point. Someone like Sam Harris, who comes out with the Islamophobia and pushes laws in that direction, or other people who basically espouse a sort of atheistic transphobia or homophobia, utilizing science or some other thing, they're put in a very different category. We actually very much shun them in society, yet we actually very were terrified of this religious belief versus other somehow more rational beliefs or other things that we consider to be different. And I'm curious why that is.
All right, I'm gonna let whoever.
I think there's a long genealogical reason for this that we need to appreciate, right? So when we look at the history of the Establishment Clause, this is very much predicated upon the debates that took place within liberalism over the course of the 17th century, many of which concern the extent to which various different religious groups should be tolerated, the extent to which the state should promote one of those groups over and above others, or whether or not liberalism could flourish and coexist with a wide variety of different religious viewpoints, and indeed whether or not those religious viewpoints might actually benefit from the adoption of something like a liberal approach. Excuse me, just please let me finish.
Sure.
Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that we need to be beholden to that genealogy, because I think it's possible to extricate the insights that one finds in the liberal approach to freedom of expression as iterated in the Establishment Clause from that history. But when we try to ask ourselves, why is it that there's all this fuss around freedom of religion and freedom of speech? That's because that's really where the origin of a lot of these debates came from.
Yeah, I just wanted to say with that I think my problem is that I understand that there's this long history of this legally speaking. I think my concern is that but we already have the system being bent in a direction where one religion is being promoted over others. We saw this during the War on Terror. We see this now with evangelicals, where they're making nonsensical religious arguments against the existence of trans people, despite there being 40 years of research on our existence. I have no problem with people being wrong, but with this idea that the religion should be this fundamentally separate protected thing, again, I don't care about the genealogy. At the end of the day, I don't think people should be able to weaponize which particular sky daddy they believe in to decide whether I get to live or die. Simple as.
And I would absolutely agree with you. And I think that both normatively and politically. But I want to say that I would actually emphasize that the danger is even more grave than we've really articulated here. So for instance, there's been some very interesting research done sociologically on the rise of Christian nationalism and its association with white nationalism by people particularly in the Midwest. And what they frequently found is that Trump and MAGA supporters, particularly evangelical MAGA supporters, about 45 to 55% of them are okay with Christian nationalism as a term. Now, what that means to them varies quite considerably. But when you look at the ways Christian nationalism overlaps with other kinds of symbolic and political associations, it's always tied to whiteness, heteronormativity, misogyny, a very, very important one that's sometimes less discussed than it should be, and of course, support for things like militarization, and of course, minimal intervention of the welfare state to try to elevate the least well off from their current social conditions. So I think that this demonstrates that the struggle against white Christian nationalism is absolutely about securing the dignity and the equality of trans and queer individuals in this country. But one of the reasons I support this struggle is because it is so deeply tied to other things that are very dear to me, which is why I consider myself an ally to the community, and why it is that I think that any progressives or liberals should also get on board with the struggle as well.
Okay. I'm going to let Brooks have the final word, but we need to bring in the next guest. Brooks, do you want to say your piece before we move on?
I got nothing.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
All right. So next we have who's waiting here. Looks like Some Noir. I think that's who this is. Hang on, give me a sec. The way Discord abbreviates things is absolutely obnoxious. Okay.
Yeah.
If you disable streamer mode, that'll go away.
Thank you, Mr. Overachiever. Okay, here we go.
Oh, so is that Skeletor in your background, Wick?
Oh no, this is my nephew got me for this. It's a transformer of some sort. I don't know.
It's the only possession Wick has. He's just in a white room with nothing.
I am poor, and you should give me money. Yes. Sure.
All right. Welcome. Do you want to introduce yourself, pronouns, etc.? I can't see your whole name for some reason. Guest? You with us? I'm going to give you 10, 9, 8, 7, 6,
Silencing
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That's because I'm not a liberal, Wick. All right. Oh, I don't want to kick you. I just want to kick you from the call. Disconnect. There we go. All right. Sorry. And now we have... Why are all of... Oh, I see. It's because I'm in streamer. Oh, that's so annoying. Whatever. Whatever. It's fine. In you go. We've got somebody called Jay. Do you want to introduce yourself?
You'll need to unmute.
You will need to unmute. Hello?
Everyone went to the bathroom at the same time.
Hello? Guest? Gonna count to 10. You gotta unmute.
Sorry, is my audio...
Oh, thank God. Okay.
Perfect.
You're back. Okay. Make your comment or ask your question, and she'll let you have a quick back and forth, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, I'm pretty interested in like a lot of what Matt's been saying. So I have a sort of different tack on this topic. I feel that the right wing, or the political right wing, at least like in North America or whatever, really has sort of laid claim to being religious, as like a sort of identity, part of their identity, right? So, and like by that sort of defaults the left to having this sort of atheistic identity. But I've met a lot of leftists who are religious. I've met a lot of LGBT people who are Christians. And like I've also seen like a sentiment among lefties that finds a lot of disgust with what they call like edgy Reddit atheists.
Mm-hmm.
Like people don't want to come off as like an edgy atheist. So I was wondering, like, is it really possible to decouple how much the intolerance of LGBT is attached to religion, to like maybe possibly allow the left to reclaim like a sort of a proud religious identity, you know what I mean? To where like they don't have to be like hide that they are religious because they're surrounded by people that they assume are atheists.
Would you like me to respond to that first, or would you like to go first?
Anybody, but I just was naming you out because you said something about decoupling.
Matt, go ahead and go first, and then we'll go, because this is something we've covered recently. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Well, this is a very complicated question, and I'm not going to be able to do the question justice here. But there are two things that I want to say. One is that the association of the political right with a religious worldview has deep roots in the history of European thought and European political practice. Now, I'm not going to get into all the details here, but the short answer is that the kind of religiosity that the right is attracted to is very much a synthesis of Aristotle with usually a particular religious belief. And the reason why they're attracted to this is Aristotle laid out a worldview that is, from their standpoint, harmonious, ordered, natural, and hierarchical. It's defined by a model of what Charles Taylor calls hierarchical complementarity, where everybody within the society has a role that they are intended to fulfill, but that role is by no means equal in its dignity. And people who do not understand their place within this hierarchical complementary society, they have to get into line. And what really occurred starting in the 17th and the 18th century was various progressive groups challenged the religious worldview that was supportive of these fundamentally conservative worldviews and opened up space for the emancipation of those who had previously not been guaranteed equality within society, whether we're thinking about, male property owners who come from the lower middle classes, but also women. It's important to note, starting in the 18th century, and then gradually that has come to include demands for racial equality, queer and trans equality, all of which I'm extremely supportive of. And to the extent that the religious right mobilizes around these rhetorics, they're following in a very ancient tradition that leftists must be absolutely critical of. Saying that, there is very much a counter tradition of progressive religiosity that it is very important to acknowledge. Early on in this presentation, I talked about the civil rights movement as an exemplar of that. But you can also think about the group that I'm part of called the Institute for Christian Socialism. And the general argument that progressive leftists will make is this, usually, again, drawing on the Christian tradition, but you can find parallels, for example, in Marxist Islamism or Marxist Judaism, et cetera, et cetera. But the basic argument of progressive Christians is, listen, Nietzsche is absolutely right that liberalism, socialism, and progressivism are all the secularized offspring of what is fundamentally a Christian worldview that holds that all people are equal before the throne of God, that gradually translates into just the belief that all people are equal, and that is the least well off and the most vulnerable in our society that deserve the most moral attention. Now, this is idiomized in various different forms. But, the progressive Christian movements that I tend to support carry on this legacy. And I think that it is absolutely an authentic position to take. And if you are a Christian leftist and you want to talk to me about it, I'm happy to talk more about it. But there are a flourishing number of groups in the United States, including ICS, the Institute for Christian Socialism, that take this project of trying to resuscitate an egalitarian, emancipatory, trans-inclusive, and queer-inclusive Christianity for America in the 21st century.
Just a brief statement.
Go ahead.
Oh wait, I thought Poppy was.
Oh,
had a response.
Poppy was, but what do you guys want to do?
Wick, go ahead and just say your thing quickly.
Yeah, I think that if a properly practicing Christian cannot help but be a leftist and progressive, in my view, I think that if you are trying to be a Christian, you are generally going to and actually practice like in following the footsteps of Christianity and Christ, you're going to be progressive.
No argument. So my response to this, and I think CC has one as well, but so as I said before earlier in the discussion, like I'm an ordained Zen priest. I've practiced pretty much every faith under the sun. ZZ is what I would call an eclectic pagan, or witch. And the thing is that to some degree, like as much as we have been somewhat antagonistic in this argument, the thing is that we've discussed on our channel before the fact that we're very sort of more so antagonistic towards anti-theism or Reddit, what's considered Reddit atheism, because I actually think it hurts us on a very, very real level. The pragmatic argument would be is that I think that there are a lot of lefties, especially like genuine leftists, not just liberals, but leftists who can't talk about their spiritual beliefs or their abilities, their desire to want to practice, because we have such an absolutely allergic environment within the left to spirituality. Some of that's earned, right? That allergy comes from the right weaponizing religion, but some of it also comes from, I think, an almost pseudo-religious take of certain philosophies being sort of weaponized in and of themselves. The whole religion is the opiate of the masses bullshit. It's like, yeah, well, if you're talking about institutional systemic religion, sure. But if you're talking about an individual person's spiritual beliefs, that's a very different discussion. And so I think the thing is that, at least in our goals, is I think that there is a way to marry spirituality to your goals and your sense of personal growth and development. That's something we talk about a lot with mental health, especially like development in the integral or the psychological sense. But as far as it affects politics, I always am skeptical of of that interaction, because the short version is in my experience, human beings always have a desire for power. It comes from our natural tendencies to be fearful, moral, in some ways, mortal creatures. And by definition, we are prone to, when given access to power, to use it because it creates a sense of security. You can see this with a father who is overly authoritarian. You can see this with Xi Jinping. So to me, I'm always skeptical of when religion gets interactive with, state power. But again, I think there's a definite place of spirituality in the left. There should be a place for spirituality in the left, because at the very least, we're just losing people who could be voting or who could be doing on the ground work because we're being allergic to them unnecessarily. So that's my piece. There you go.
One thing to ask Poppy if people get a chance is about some of the benefits of spiritual beliefs on like a psychological level. Like there are demonstrably some of this, and Poppy knows that way better than I do. I'm not always big on the like reclaiming necessarily, because there's a whole lot that goes into that. But I have seen positive ways that like integrating religion into this works, especially because like we tend to advocate for the things that we're passionate about, right? We tend to show up as people, and we show up with our full authentic, our full selves, basically. And for a lot of people, that does include some form of religious beliefs. And so some instances I've seen this go well is like with Zen or Unitarian Universalists, which are both very strongly based on like positive principles. Okay, and they're not necessarily making like prescriptive claims about like after death. I mean, there might be some depending on the denomination or who you're asking, but by and large, it's based on shared principles. And so I think one of the interesting things that we've been dealing with too on our server is how to make more space for lefties who are also religious that want to talk about that. And so we're kind of figuring out the best way to do that right now to still give space to that, because in our system, like we talk a lot about how like mental health is political. Okay, like these, especially for queer folks, these things are inextricably tied together. There's no way to pull these apart. So I think there are some ways that people can, on the individual level at least, have a personal sense of reclaiming. Large scale reclaiming is another story, but on a personal sense, yeah, I absolutely think it can be done.
On the subject of intergroup tolerance, it is a magnificently it is a very interesting thing to see just how different culturally the perception of a minute is between Americans and Canadians. Does anybody else want to respond to Jarvkar?
I just wanted to say one more thing, which is that I found
the great equalizer.
I thought Zena and Poppy's articulation of their own efforts to try to reach out to leftists who are religious very moving, and actually I see it as a very positive sign for the future. Just again, coming from my own standpoint, using the Christian idiom to reflect my own religious beliefs, which isn't to say that there aren't other ways to do so. I know that Fairy Queen didn't want us to talk about the substance of a religious view and whether or not it's correctly interpreted or not. But my view of this is that if one looks at the Bible, one sees very clearly that Christ says that the wretched of the earth will know that God is on their side, and that later on is what gave Frantz Fanon the famous title for his great work of post-colonial theory, by the way. I think that a religious left is very much a live prospect in this country. If you were to find a Christian religious movement that took seriously this idea that our primary duties are to the most vulnerable in our society, and that would involve a very different approach to politics than what you've seen on the religious right, which tends to seem to think that big business, large corporations are the kinds of things that we need to be protecting as Christian leftists. As a Christian community.
Thank you very much. Anyone else?
63% of Americans consider themselves Christian. That's 210 million people. If we were just to reject them outright, that's silly, especially in a democracy. Don't do that, gang. That's death for any kind of legislative power.
Yeah, I mean, just to respond to what everybody said, like, yeah, that all of that makes me very confident, because I think the act of recuperation is sort of like having people on our side that are proud, to speak about it. But yeah, personally, I'm an atheist, but I think it would just be better off to sort of have like religion in the hands of the left, because, I prefer more compassion from a system that ostensibly says it's about compassion. But yeah, before I go, one last thing I have to say look at my avocado. It's huge.
That's TOS. All right.
Discord's got guidelines against that.
Okay, we're gonna bring on 2 more people, and then we're gonna call it because this is going much slower than I anticipated. But that's how we do, I suppose.
I want to have a conversation about religion and politics. That's like the number one thing you're not supposed to do at the dinner table because it always goes on long.
We didn't even get dinner.
Yeah,
I know, right? Where is the dinner?
Yeah,
that was a mistake. I should have ordered food. All right, we have Insomnoir. This is your last chance. Oh, I see a green square, but I don't hear anything.
You.
Hello.
Oh, no.
Squeeze harder. There you go. Okay.
Sorry, 1 second. Sorry about that. I was having I have an NVIDIA card, and so I have to run everything through an NVIDIA controller.
I'm certain someday I will find it in my heart to forgive you. Please.
Okay, so first of all, you can call me Insomnia. Insomnia Noir is my full name. I'm sure Wick knows who I am. I've harassed him on and off. Yeah, and I don't really have the kindest of words to say here, but hopefully now that you've heard my tone, you'll know that I'm trying my best to be nice.
Don't do that. Be mean to me if you feel. Free speech is for everyone, including you. So go ahead, hit me with it. Be as
no, I don't want to give you
like.
No, I don't want to give you another panel topic. So first of all, I go by he, they. I am non-binary, specifically autigender. Extremely neurodivergent, and so you'll have to forgive me if I seem very monotone. But anyway,
you're on the President Sunday channel. It's okay.
You're among friends.
You're among your people.
Yeah. So there's a few things I would like to point out. I myself, everyone who's in the Cathedral knows that I am a Christian. I am a leftist as well. And yes, it is very difficult for... Oh, yes. I have 4 years of undergrad, 4 years of graduate studies in Old Testament specifically.
Damn.
Wow. Yeah.
And right now I'm actually, for various reasons, I have switched over to a master's in social work. I feel like I can do more. I feel like I can do more damage to the system that way. So there's a few things I would point out. First of all, it is unbearably apparent as to who has skin in this game and who doesn't. And so, as a Christian, I would like to apologize to any minority identities in this call for the actions of people who proclaim the same faith that I have. I do not espouse any hatred towards any group. In fact, I fight for
just to be clear, Insomnoir, I think the only person you're actually highlighting in this conversation is Matt right now. I think that's a little unfair.
Oh no, I'm going after.
I think he's the only one who's identified as a Christian here, isn't he? Unless I've missed something.
No, I have no idea what Matt believes as far as a Christian is concerned, so I'm not. I bear no judgment towards him.
All right.
But yeah, it's interesting to me those who are speaking in theoretical terms, and then you have, I believe, Star Panda and Xena and Poppy literally saying, "Hey, this is our life you're talking about." Now, as someone who is non-binary and autistic, people are trying to kill me too. It's really interesting. That's where you get anti-vax sentiment, which also comes out of the religious right, interestingly enough. But I guess my sticking point here is why are we still privileging the idea that nonviolence is okay? Nonviolence is the preferred method when we're talking about survival of particular identities that have existed.
Just in the interest of expediency, can I
Sure.
Suggest a quick modification of the question so people can answer it more clearly? So how about this? Yeah, and let me know if this is satisfying, okay? Why are we privileging nonviolence as the preferred response to systemic / state violence and things of that sort. Is that a fair representation of your question?
Yes,
All right.
you saved me from my autism. Thank you.
2 reasons. I'll be brief.
Go
One,
for it.
the pragmatic reasons. If you get in a fight with the state, you will lose and you will die. Second of all, if you on the moral level, if you
it's an interesting point for an American, but continue.
I'm just saying, if you fight with the state, you will lose, right? At least, again, I don't see a world where minority groups are able to exercise enough physical might, especially today, right, in order to win that fight. I don't see it. The state will stop you, and they will destroy you, and that sucks, but it will happen. The second is on a moral level. If we're trying to enforce our will through the point of a gun, I don't know about that. I think that's if we can get something done non-violently, it's just preferable on all levels, because again, violence begets violence begets violence begets violence. Where does bloodshed stop, right? And we see this play out again and again with revolution, then counter-revolution, then counter-revolution, and the oppressed quickly become the oppressors when they get that power, if they go by violent means. But anyway, that's that.
All right. Anyone else?
So I will respond to this because I'm picking up, to be very, very clear, before I launch into this story, I want to buttress this by acknowledging the very real concerns that Poppy, that Xena, that, I apologize, Star Panda, and you have Insomnia. You're right. There is a huge amount of transphobia that exists in our society. It is absolutely the case that many people who are trans, people who I love, are fearing the laws that are being passed. I do not disagree. I do, however, take great umbrage at the idea that on this question of religious intolerance and whose views we are tolerant of is something that I don't have skin in the game. So I will share with you the personal story of my family. My family, my grandparents, they were both Irish. They both came from a small town called Dunleary. And my great-grandfather, his name, I can't give his name, but he was involved in the Irish Republican Army. He used to store guns in his backyard and covered them with horse shit so that the black and tans wouldn't find them. The street and the area and the communities in which they live, we're talking about violence, and I'm hearing this. I understand the concern. Until you've seen a child's school being blown up, cars being thrown cars being blown up, guns in the street, it's really easy to talk about this in vague terms. It's a different thing when your family has actually been involved with this. Religious discrimination, like that it happened to people who in my family, is something that doesn't affect us anymore because they moved and went to the United States, but it is still an enormous part of our life and a part of our history. And so I reject very strongly, in the strongest possible terms, that at least I do not have skin in the game. If for no other reason than the people and the community of people from where I come from. I take very great offense to that. And I will end with one more addendum. I don't usually discuss this. I was diagnosed to being on the autism spectrum. I'll agree there are lots of laws that exist that are horrible to people who are autistic. I also think that it's wrong to use it to slam dunk a W on who you think has skin in the game and who you think doesn't.
Okay. All right, Tipper Gore.
So-
let's put that back in the. Let's put that away for a second because you've.
Hang on. Wait.
She's had her hand up for a minute.
One sec. Yeah. Let's Xena reply, and then in Somnoir I'll let you respond.
I think it was me who had the reply, and I was going to say two things. Was like, one is that, we keep talking about the Constitution and how great the freedom of religion is. I also want to bring up, this whole thing about violence begets violence. I mean, the right to bear arms exists also. If we're going to be really hardcore American, again, I own guns. I have no problem defending my family because, again, that's the history of this country. If that means I lose against the state, so be it. I'm not going against the state. What I am doing, though, is defending against the fact that there's potential violence against me. So that's one. Two is that, again, this idea that, we're going to... first off, I guess I want to say, Fairy Queen, I'm really sorry that your family went through that. That really fucking sucks. That's really awful. I also want to say that, until you've been in a session with a non-binary child who you've had to hold crying because they are afraid to go to school, because they are afraid of the violence that will be enacted against them, I say the same thing. I have literally had to stop kids from cutting their wrists. I have had to enact like school plans in order to make sure that a kid doesn't have to doesn't have like, you know, atrocities done to them. Again, I'm not saying that your experiences are valid and that there is definitely an argument to be made that religious intolerance can go into horrible extremes. But right now, this country isn't dealing with an issue of religious intolerance. What it's dealing with is a very small vocal minority wants us dead and is bending the system over backwards.
All right, does anybody else want to...
Sorry, but I will respond to that. First of all, I do have experience with people who are trans in my life who have...
But you're not trans.
Right, and you're not Irish.
Can you deal with their argument?
You don't have family members in your life who you are related to who were dragged out of their houses, had their entire shop burned to the ground, and had machine guns put up against their skulls, at least to the best of my knowledge, not for religious reasons. So it is,
not
to
for
me,
religious reasons.
I will reiterate, okay? I have great empathy, and I do know and take very seriously the concerns that we have. But the flippant way that we are discussing religious violence and the consequences that we can have, I don't even quite know what to say to that. Especially the idea that this
feels as though you prioritize, but again, it feels as though you're prioritizing one group over another. And that's the issue, is you keep saying you have compassion for us, but I don't care about the compassion. What I care about is people who genuinely actually get it. And it feels like there's such a concern for this potential fear of religious violence that, again, we're having real violence happen right now, and we're arguing about whether how we deal with that. Like, again, I literally pointed out historical references as to how this has happened. You're saying like our people haven't been hurt? What?
To be very clear, I'm not the appeal that I was making before was more of the taking umbrage at the idea that this issue did not personally matter to me, or that I didn't have skin in the game. I take very personal umbrage with that. That's the issue. I'm not having an intellectual conversation about the history of transphobia or the history of religious discrimination. I'm taking issue with the personal point that was levied at me and the other people at the other half of this panel, and the assumptions that were made that were unfair and not well received.
If I could say one thing also.
Please.
Now, I just want to be very clear when it comes to your characterization of my language or some of our languages, theoretical and abstract. I'm actually willing to say that I think you're correct about that. And I think that part of that does come from a lack of firsthand experience. However, I would like to make clear that I don't think that the deployment of a theoretical or a legal language to try to adjudicate the proper way to respond to these problems is inappropriate. And actually, I don't think it's anti-leftist either. Fundamentally, I would say that my position is a Gramscian one. Now, we all know that Gramsci, of course, faced circumstances that are actually fairly similar to what's going on, say, in Florida right now. You see the rise of a highly revanchist right-wing state that is willing to use extraordinary amounts of authoritarianism to discriminate against highly vulnerable groups with the association or with at least the tacit consent of big business and other major players in society. In these kinds of circumstances, there's absolutely a place for affect and expressions of disdain and anger. And I think that those should be encouraged in many circumstances. However, it is also incumbent upon us to intellectually mince these problems, not so that we can kind of pedantically, count, the number of different references to Hegel that we can throw out there, but because we need to have a clear idea of what it is that we're facing so that we can have an equally clear idea of how it is that we can most effectively confront it. And I think that analyzing the right legal routes, for example, to be able to obtain protections for the trans community and the queer community more generally is a very viable and indeed necessary option. I am not optimistic about the potential going down that road given the current makeup of the Supreme Court, but we should be looking into that as a potential strategy. The same is true when it comes to trying to win the intellectual debate against people like, say, Matt Walsh, or like, say, some of the individuals I mentioned, Adrian Vimule, who are going to try to argue very vehemently that there is something fundamentally wrong with being trans because it violates, say, natural law. I think that there is a place there for people to offer theoretical arguments, as I should add, Zena and Poppy very rightly referred to demonstrate why that viewpoint is wrong. And I don't think that precludes other approaches. I think that we have to have an awful lot of tools in our arsenal in order to fight against bigotry. And theory and rationalism are some of those tools. There are others, and they're just as important, but we shouldn't abstain from using those where we think that we can win. And I think that ultimately, because trans individuals are individuals and they are entitled to human rights and they are entitled to dignity and to respect, that will be on the winning side of this argument in every single circumstance where ultimately we are confronted with bigotry and with bigots who would like to advance junk science and junk theology to support what are fundamentally hate-filled positions.
All right, and Some Noir, if you want to make your final comment, we need to move on because we're running on the clock. So.
Yeah, and I have to apologize for my laughter earlier. That was more of a nervous tick, and I accidentally hit my space bar.
Totally fine.
So, here's sort of where I land in a country now where we have somewhere between 100 and 130,000. My numbers might be off because who knows. Where you have over 100,000 trans people basically fleeing as refugees within their own country, where people who specialize in the study of genocide are issuing warnings, red letter warnings, that there is a genocide happening in the US of transgender people based on the rhetoric that is being used and weaponized by the religious right. See Matt Walsh,
Was this me or him?
That was you, Wick. What the fuck did you do on my stream? Some Noir, you're back.
Okay, I don't know where I left off. So my point is, we live in a country where there's over 100,000 transgender folk living as refugees in their own country. They are actually moving to other parts of the country to avoid persecution, where we have institutes who specifically study genocide, issuing warnings about the language of Michael Knowles, Matt Walsh, and these people that you claim that you can defeat in this sort of realm of ideas, which I wholeheartedly reject because these are ideologues. They have no reason to change their mind. With that in mind, I understand the need for rhetoric, but at this point, I have to push back on the idea that violence and we'll say this in a video game, violence in a video game is not off the table. It has not been off the table historically. We have seen this happen before. Pride was a riot because of a transgender woman who may or may not own up to the fact that she threw a brick. Okay, so let's perhaps couch our ideas of theoretical knowledge in the fact that
Stop talking vaguely. Who do you want to do violence against and how? Tell us. Come on. Who do you want to hurt?
The people who would seek to do harm against others, specifically trans people, members of the LGBTQI community. And I'm not saying that it is the only resort. I'm saying that it should be on the table, and that it should not be at the whim of some neoliberal who thinks that, we can just vote.
No, if you try to hurt other people,
hang
I'm
on,
gonna stop you.
Hang on, Wick. It's a good line to end on. We need to bring in the next person. Thank you, and Some Noir.
Can I say something real quick?
Really quick.
I will try to be brief.
Succeed at being brief.
Fairy Queen, I appreciate your concern with the trans community. I'm not trying to take away from that. You have brought up MLK twice in this conversation, saying things that he said. He also said that he was gravely disappointed with the white moderate. People getting in the way of progress. And like he didn't just say nonviolence. There were other ways that we do, like protests and stuff. Like sometimes these things do get violent, and it's not really about like whether we are violent or not. It's who started it. And in many cases, mostly it's going to be the people who are trying to legislate other people out of existence who are doing the violence first. So we're not asking to do violence to other people. We're asking to protect ourselves, right? So that's all I'm going to say.
All right. No more. Insomnoir, thank you very much. We're bringing in the next person. That was 20 minutes. Okay.
I got a lot to say on this, but fair enough.
Last person. I think Razor was waiting the longest. This is the last one for today. Better luck next time. Razor. Never mind.
Wow, that was loud.
Why is it still playing? Okay, it's gone now. What the hell? That took a long time to get rid of. Okay.
That was kind of epic.
MSDXR.
It's like in a world where
Yeah, it's really I love when random people demonetize my stream. Okay, MSDXR, how are you doing? Hello. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Terribly sorry. Next person.
No,
okay.
I tried to save him.
We're not that kind of it's not a democracy. Cascadian Unionist, how are you doing? Okay, why on earth you are banned from the server? Do not come in to the waiting room if you're not going to come on. Last person, Stomps Are Us. Hello. Hello? Stomps?
Everyone fell asleep.
All right, that's our show. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you very much for thank you to our panelists.
Hold on. I'm sorry. Razor did an accident.
What?
When he did play that song. It was like a setting in Discord for some reason. So, if you want to try again, if you don't, that's.
I really don't, but I'm going to.
Okay.
I'm gonna take one more question.
Okay, Razor's now banned. In clockwise order, shout out your channels, please. Fairy Queen.
I apologize.
Hi, I'm Fairy Queen. You can find me on Twitter and you can find me on YouTube. Thank you.
Matt.
Yeah, I'm Matt. You can find me on Twitter, or you can read my books and articles, wherever things are printed, basically.
Star Panda.
I am Star Panda TV everywhere. You can find me just typing in Star Panda TV. Thanks.
Wick.
Wick TV on Twitch and Kick at Wick-TV on YouTube. Check us out.
Yeah, Xena and Poppy, I'm not going to let you shut yourselves out, actually, because I'm sending everyone to your stream anyways. Find Xena and Poppy, Wholesome Degenerates, apparently, on YouTube.
That's
Cheerio.
true.
Have a good night, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
I can be out tonight.
Bye.